The man shouted loudly at the girl, kicked her out of the house, and announced that he no longer considered her his daughter. These words broke the heart of the poor girl, who truly longed for attention and her father's love. A modern young woman was lying on her bed, eating chips and reading a novel. Countess Adele Hyde of Seaton spread dirty rumors about sweet Sabrina. She was an evil girl who ceaselessly committed all sorts of atrocities. The villain's parents and the novel's main character's parents and her fiancé were complete opposites. But this did not justify her. Count Seaton was worried that the punishment for Adele's mischief would extend to the family, so he simply kicked his daughter out, and a while later, he ended up with the villain dying of hunger alone on the street. At that moment, the girl decided to finish reading, and first decided to lie down and get some sleep. Tomorrow was supposed to be the only day she could rest, so the girl looked forward to it. However, the next moment she woke up in the middle of the room and didn't understand how she ended up here. A stranger stood in front of her, reprimanded her, and ordered her out of his house. The heroine saw her blue hair, heard the name Adele, and immediately guessed that she was in the body of the novel's villain. She didn't understand how this happened, because just a couple of moments ago she was lying in her bed. At that moment, Count Seaton ordered his bodyguards to throw the girl out of the house. The men immediately grabbed her by the arms and dragged her towards the exit, giving Adele no chance to dodge. The girl was upset because they didn't give her a chance to fix everything. In her world, she was the owner and chef of a Korean restaurant. Although Korean cuisine was quite complex, the heroine happily chose it. She trusted her skills because she had been an excellent cook her entire life. The girl thoroughly enjoyed having her own restaurant and tirelessly practicing her culinary skills. That was until she got into her new body and found herself on the street. However, the girl didn't plan to give up, because if she was kicked out of the house, she would somehow have to make ends meet. Fortunately for her, this world was not very different from hers, so the heroine chose a way to earn money. It took her quite a while to find the right ingredients, but Adele started cooking. She decided to do what she loved, to queue up and carve out a niche for street food. The street kids loved cutting out various shapes from their cookies. The boy wanted to receive another free portion, but the girl grabbed his hand and surprised him by begging. However, they agreed that the boy would get more cookies if he brought new people. The boy didn't cheat by bringing his friends, so Adele launched the promotion. If a person could cut out the shape exactly, they received a second cookie as a gift. Thanks to this, Adele was able to pay the rent and dreamed of opening her own restaurant in the future. One night, a girl with a cart was heading home, and on the way, her utensils accidentally fell out. She tried to control the situation, because getting new ones was troublesome. Adele looked at her earnings and realized that if she continued in the same spirit, she could soon start saving. At first it was unusual, but the girl knew how to adapt and gradually sold her jewelry to support the business. In fact, her jewelry and things were not that important to her. She just wanted to cook. However, the girl was so happy that she completely forgot that along with success, troubles always come. One night when the moon was full in the sky, some threatening guys approached her. Adele tried to justify herself by saying that she was just a small street vendor. However, they were not fooled, so the girl resigned herself to her fate. She traveled in the carriage where they put her and thought about who could have kidnapped her. Adele didn't understand why someone would need her if she was kicked out of the count's house, and the engagement was broken. The girl gave up and decided she would only find out the truth when she met her boss. She could only hope that no serious problems would arise. After a while, the kidnappers took the girl to a luxurious mansion, where her boss met her. Adele was surprised that the man knew her life and ancestry well. However, he only laughed when the girl suggested that he needed a ransom from her parents. She didn't understand at all what other options there could be to profit from her kidnapping. However, after a moment, the man stepped out of the shadows, and now his face was clearly visible. Beautiful features, dark hair, bright golden eyes, all this marked him as Kyle Auburn. In the original story, he was the second prince of the empire and the main villain of the novel. Adele was so scared that her whole body began to tremble. The girl involuntarily wrapped her arms around his neck. The man immediately noticed her strange reaction and asked why she was so afraid of him. However, Adele justified herself by saying that she simply did not expect to meet the prince in the middle of the night. At first, she thought he was just a rough heartthrob, but when his role was revealed, fans went crazy because he turned out to be the villain. The man took a moment to think, but then made a decision. After which, the young man smiled and looked as if he posed no danger. Adele was surprised because the story described him as a withdrawn and cold person. Meanwhile, Kyle got straight to the point and announced that he wanted to hire the girl as his personal chef. Adele was very surprised by this proposal, as she did not expect it at all. Adele didn't understand why the prince needed a personal chef, so she reminded him that she was a street vendor of sweets. The girl also didn't understand why he chose her, because she was the only one who knew how to cook dalgona well. However, what interested the prince most was the name of the dish the girl was preparing. So, Adele said she had invented the most unique and interesting sweet in the world. It seemed to her that, due to her excitement, she was making too many mistakes, because it was the first time she had met such an important person. The main character of the story was the crown prince, who had a younger brother. He acted as a secondary character, being the second noblest person in the empire. The series of misfortunes began after the emperor died of an incurable disease. The prince was kind only to those women he loved. Towards the rest, he was a ruthless tyrant. Having ascended the throne, the prince framed his younger brother and expelled him from the empire. Everyone thought the second prince had simply disappeared, but Kyle became sad. And upon returning to the empire, he began to commit all sorts of atrocities. First, he killed the main character's assistant, then began monitoring everything related to the main characters. The story portrayed him as a young and cruel sword master, so Adele decided that the smartest thing to do was simply hide. However, she failed because at that moment, she was in front of the second prince and talking to him. The young man asked the girl to show him how his signature sweet was prepared. Adele was very surprised by such a request, but followed the prince to the palace kitchen. The girl hadn't seen such spacious kitchens in a long time, so she was delighted. Everything looked new, and the room itself was even larger than the hotel kitchen where she worked in her world. At that moment, the prince was nearby, observing the girl's actions and her work. Then Adele admitted that she felt uncomfortable cooking under the supervision of a stranger. Furthermore, if someone discovers the secret of how to cook the dish, the business idea will be stolen from her, for which she will have to pay. However, the prince surprised our girl by saying he wasn't interested in the recipe. He was only interested in what was in the kitchen, to make sure the girl didn't poison the food. Kyle admitted that it wasn't that he didn't trust her, it's just that he didn't trust anyone at all. However, if this is the girl's wish, he will gladly pay for the secret of how to prepare the dessert. The heroine was immediately inspired after these words, because she had already imagined how quickly she would get rich. However, she also remembered that if she seemed too greedy, the prince might cut off her head. She had already made enough mistakes, so she only wanted to ask for her living expenses to be covered for a year. Adele asked for gold, but the prince, without hesitation, said he would give her 10 times more. After these words, our heroine literally went crazy with happiness. She became very cheerful and promised the prince to prepare the best desserts of her life. Adele immediately prepared a ladle, wooden sticks, sugar, baking soda with a potato masher, and a star-shaped mold. In fact, she would have brought even more utensils, but no one would have imagined that she would have to cook in the imperial kitchen. The prince was surprised that the girl needed so few different items to prepare sweets. So, to give it a new flavor, Adele suggested adding a little nutmeg and cinnamon. After this, the girl realized that the man hadn't even tasted her dessert, because otherwise he would have known that it was just pure sugar. Therefore, she could not understand how the prince knew about her and what his purpose was. However, in any case, the girl considered herself a winner, because with these sweets she could earn 10,000. So she kept cooking as if she were making the best dessert of her life. Adele carefully heated the sugar in a ladle over the fire, added baking soda, kneaded it, and then poured it onto a baking sheet. After that, the girl pressed the dough on top, forming a circle, and cut a star in the center. After this, her sweet was completely ready and could be served to the prince. The young man grabbed a cookie and simply broke it in half. Adele was a little annoyed because she put a lot of effort into making the star look beautiful. The cook watched the prince take a bite of her dessert and anxiously awaited his reaction. However, the second prince was only concerned about whether the cookies were poisoned or not. The girl was annoyed because the man was watching the preparation and still didn't trust her. But what annoyed her even more was that he tasted her dessert and said absolutely nothing about the flavor. However, after this, the man immediately admitted that Adele was not preparing dessert for him. Kyle walked down the dark hallway, followed by our heroine with a tray in her hands. The girl felt that the situation was developing strangely. because they were heading to an unknown place. After a while, they approached huge forged gates guarded by knights. From the conversation between the prince and the knights, the heroine realized that they had reached the emperor's room. Only then did she understand why the man was so cautious, and checked that the dessert was not poisoned. At that moment, Kyle was very angry because the knights would not let him into his father's room. So the men would have argued among themselves if the voice of the emperor himself had not been heard from behind the doors. Only after his permission did the young people enter the bedroom. The gray-haired man was in his bed, surrounded by assistants, and asked why his son was visiting him in the middle of the night. Adele immediately noticed that the man was very thin. His arms gave him away. The girl even suggested that the emperor had already been overcome by an incurable disease. However, at that moment, the prince snatched the plate from her hands and handed the desserts to the emperor. The heroine immediately noticed the strange reaction of the empire's leader, who recognized the dessert. With trembling hands, he took one of the cookies from the plate and brought it to his lips. Adele didn't understand why ordinary sweetness caused such emotion in the emperor. At some point, the man began to eat cookies, but he coughed, and then his son and his assistant immediately rushed to him. However, after a moment, a happy smile appeared on the emperor's face, and tears welled up in his eyes. It turned out that Empress Selene, who was an additional character barely mentioned because she died at the beginning of the story, made the same desserts. The prince pointed out that this does not require any special ingredients, so you can enjoy the name at any time. The emperor immediately thanked his son for this gift and asked who prepared the dessert. Then Kyle introduced Adele to him, presenting her as his personal chef. He explained that the girl sold these delicacies on the street and invented them herself. The emperor remembered that his beloved wife had told him the same thing when she was alive. So he asked the name of the street vendor, who brought him good memories. The emperor was very surprised when he learned that the count's daughter had become the prince's cook. Adele realized that if things continued like this, she would have to meet her father. Therefore, the girl took everything into her own hands and announced that she had been expelled from the family, so she no longer obeyed anyone. She trembled with fear, realizing that she now dared to contradict the emperor himself. However, he only said that in this case they had no problems and the girl could continue working. The heroine did not want to be called Alda, because in a story with that name, a sad fate awaited her. After this, the emperor smiled and said that he wanted to try the girl's other dishes. The servant tried to object, but the man noted that whoever managed to awaken his appetite deserved a place in the imperial kitchen. Adele was very surprised, and at the same time happy that everything had been resolved so quickly for her. She just hoped she could cook for the most important person in the country. This way, she would obviously earn a lot of money. Besides, the girl hadn't cooked her favorite dish in a long time, so she gladly accepted this offer. In her dreams, Adele already saw herself taking the stage and accepting congratulations as the best chef. She dreamed of being called the chef responsible for the emperor's meals. It would be great to open her own restaurant and then present him with a good menu. However, the prince told the girl not to relax, because problems could arise in the future. He recalled that the emperor hadn't eaten anything for a whole month. Now he only eats what is prepared by the girl's hands. Even if it was only sweets for now, she managed to get him to eat. Therefore, the problem was wider, because after this, the girl would receive a lot of unwanted attention. At that moment, the young man noticed that Adele was preparing something new. The heroine explained that cookies are just a dessert and not a full meal. After a month of fasting, severe weakness should appear, so the emperor now needed light food and healthy. The prince noticed that the girl cared about his father, so he felt a little embarrassed by this. Adele hadn't cooked for a long time due to a lack of ingredients and didn't want to get carried away. She had to be careful because the lord hadn't eaten for a long time. The emperor has dystrophy and says he has absolutely no appetite. During his illness, he only ate chicken broth, so now he needed simple meals. Adele is a Korean cook, so she almost never prepares normal chicken soup. So she decided to use a slightly different dish and show off her trump card. After a while, the emperor sat down at the table and waited with pleasure to see what dish would be served to him for lunch. He lifted the lid of the tray and saw a bowl of homemade soup in front of him. The man immediately realized how much the cook was hoping for his approval. The prince warned that they carefully checked all food for poison. The servant was worried about his master, so he advised him not to eat too much soup, but to eat it slowly. However, after the first spoonful of homemade soup, the emperor was truly delighted. Adele was very happy that she got his taste preferences right. The man immediately noticed that there was something unusual in the soup that enhanced its flavor. Then the cook explained that it was real chestnut porridge. He added that it contains milk and rice, similar to cream, but the taste is much milder. Adele explained that this porridge helps normalize digestion and sells tranquility. The prince immediately remembered how the girl reasoned while cooking in the kitchen. The emperor noticed that the taste was unusual due to the addition of grated nuts, but he really liked it. The man admitted that he hadn't experienced such emotions for a long time due to normal food. The prince was surprised to hear such words from his father, so he was impressed by the girl's work. The servant literally shed tears of joy when he saw that his master had finished his meal for the first time in a long time. At some point, the emperor admitted that he even wanted more and regretted reaching such a state. Adele decided to take advantage of the situation and noticed that the emperor had rejuvenated before her eyes. She announced that she would gladly continue working and cooking for the emperor. From the servant's reaction, the girl immediately realized that she had said something very absurd. She immediately apologized for her rudeness and blushed with shame. However, the emperor simply laughed and asked his son to take care of the girl who arrived at his palace. She was very happy to have been officially hired, so she thanked the emperor from the bottom of her heart. After that, the boys went out into the hallway, and the prince explained that she would be given a room, and they would send a messenger to pick up the rest of her things. Kyle was surprised by the clarity with which the girl showed her emotions and how well she performed in her job. He had heard of Adele before because she was popular in society, but she turned out to be much more famous than he thought. The prince was thinking to himself when one of the servants approached from behind and called him. He leaned down to Kyle's ear and whispered some important report they had obtained. The count reacted faster than the prince expected, so now they had some difficulties. Adele braided her hair, put on her apron, and threw the curtains wide open. The girl was in a great mood and enjoyed the beautiful weather outside the window. The prince watched what the girl was preparing and couldn't understand how anything tasty could come out of this. However, Adele once again remembered that if you want to know a secret, you must pay for it. However, she replied that in ordinary life, she does not throw money around carelessly. At that moment, she did it only because her father needed urgent help. While cooking, the girl periodically explained what she was doing and what she was adding. This time she added ginger, which turned out to be very beneficial for health. The prince was grateful that the girl cared so much about her father's health. However, he noted that the emperor rejected any medication due to the smell and the unpleasant taste, so he was worried that the girl would get angry if the emperor took out her dish. However, Adele only smiled and said that in that case, she herself would eat her dish. She realized that some people say that food is the best medicine. For the dish, she had to thoroughly clean the chicken legs and crack open a head of garlic. Then chop the onion, add the ginger, and put everything into the broth to cook. While it's cooking, you can start chopping the main ingredients. From time to time, you can approach the pot and taste the resulting broth. After this, you should stuff the chicken with rice and chestnuts, and then add to the broth and cook again until the meat is cooked. After this, the dish can be served to the emperor and eaten at the same time as the sauce. The man was impressed with the presentation and didn't understand why he wanted to try the dish as soon as possible. He immediately tasted a bit of the broth and felt the mild aroma of medicinal herbs, which was not intrusive. After this, the emperor carefully tore off the most tender meat from the chicken, which had been boiling for several hours. However, what surprised him most was that there was something hidden inside the chicken. The emperor carefully cut the carcass and golden rice, and chestnuts immediately fell out. The man couldn't believe that such a way of cooking rice existed that combined so many different flavors. After this, the emperor immediately put down the spoon and noted that this was not chicken soup at all. At first, Adele was upset and began to fear that the man did not like her dish. However, the emperor announced that he would now call this dish imperial chicken soup. It was so good that it was several times superior to regular chicken soup. The servant and the prince were stunned by this statement, but Adele didn't understand what was so special. Then, the servant explained that adding such an adjective is an incredible honor, and that the girl should thank the emperor. Adele herself did exactly that, but she actually felt embarrassed in front of the true author of this dish from her world. However, a second later, the girl was even more surprised, because the head of state appointed her imperial head chef. The servant was horrified, because the boss had already been chosen, and it was impossible to put another person in such an important position. He recalled that the nobility would not recognize the girl, and all the other cooks would rebel. Therefore, the emperor decided to hold a banquet, and the main dish would be Adele's dish, after which she would be appointed official chef. So, those who taste her food will simply have to accept her new position. The servant understood that he could not oppose the emperor, so he accepted his decision. The next second, he cried tears of joy, which greatly surprised Adele. After that, they began to discuss the budget and the date, and the prince called the girl to go out. Adele left the emperor's chambers and headed towards the kitchen, accompanied by the prince. The first prince, the main character of the story, already had some power. If the emperor dies, according to the plot, the throne will automatically pass to his heirs. In the story, it passed into the hands of Kyle's older brother, the first prince, who exiled his brother. That's why the girl was worried about the secondary character she got to know better. However, he literally read her thoughts and noted that the girl had nothing to worry about. He explained that the purpose of the banquet was to show that the emperor was once again at his best, so that no one would pay much attention to the cook. Adele was annoyed, because this meant that her dishes were so terrible that no one would care. The prince realized that he had said something wrong and hurried to calm our heroine. However, the girl was not upset. She understood that everyone around her still didn't realize how good she was at cooking. With these words, the prince hurt her pride, so the girl challenged herself. She promised that she would demonstrate all her skills, and everyone would cry and beg her to cook something else. The most important rule when cooking soup was that the longer you cook it, the better it tastes. Therefore, a real chef had to combine all the ingredients and then let the broth soak them. Only after this, the soup could be served on the table and offered for tasting. Adele understood that the prince was not deliberately ignoring her. He simply didn't fully understand her skill. Therefore, the girl hoped that the young man would taste her dish and be delighted. Carl decided to follow the cook's example, so he carefully took the spoon and returned to the soup. Adele was delighted with how wonderfully he combined the meat, ginger, and other ingredients. The girl was very happy because she hadn't had the chance to cook such dishes for a long time. That's why she understood why the emperor decided to call this soup imperial. She thought she was cooking the most delicious food, so she couldn't stop. The girl hoped that the second prince had already eaten his portion and could give his opinion. However, then she realized that the young man hadn't even touched the soup on his plate. The cook supposed that it was all because he noticed ginger inside. However, despite this, the emperor was delighted with her soup. However, he did not develop this topic further and wanted to tell the girl something, as she had already finished eating. He warned that Count Seaton had been behaving strangely lately. Adele immediately realized that her father and his family were plotting something against her. Carl remembered that the emperor's cook was in charge of preparing the banquet, so they wouldn't take their eyes off the girl. After his words, Adele assumed that the young man was worried about her. However, he felt very embarrassed and said that he simply warned her as a thank you for the delicious food. The cook noticed that the man hadn't even touched the soup that was specially served to him. Kyle noticed his mistake and said he was about to try. Adele was very worried because she wanted to see the prince's real reaction. The girl expected him to start idolizing her skills and asking for more. However, instead, Kyle seemed embarrassed to say that he didn't like the food. The cook couldn't believe that the second prince had such a strange reaction to her soup. The young man kept trying to convince the girl that he enjoyed it. However, she realized that he was testing her, so she simply took the food away from him. At some point, she decided that the prince was testing her in this way. The girl promised herself that next time, she would make the young man beg on his knees. Then she made it clear to the prince that she had worked hard to prepare this dish. After this, Adele said that she had no friends, and no one had visited her since she was kicked out of the house. Kyle apologized for this, which surprised the cook so much that the plates almost fell out of her hands. She explained that princes usually do not apologize to palace servants. However, Kyle explained that he is not just any prince, and that he knows what it's like to be alone. It seemed like he wanted to say something else, but he suddenly snapped out of it and fell silent. Adele realized that no one supported him in the imperial palace, and that he couldn't trust anyone. But at least she still had family she could talk to. She only saw spoilers, so she didn't really understand why Kyle became a villain. After that, the girl went to the library and took several books from there. Through this, she hoped to study popular recipes and select dishes that would be prepared at the banquet. The cook intended to prepare desserts that were popular throughout the empire. Kyle warned her to do everything right if she didn't want to waste time. At some point, Adele even thought that she had sided with the wrong hero. However, she attributed everything to the fact that she got up early and was very hungry at that time. The girl dreamed of returning to her kitchen and eating buttered abalone. She thoroughly enjoyed being the imperial chef because she had all the ingredients at her disposal. Exposition. Adele was walking down the hallway when suddenly someone called her from behind. The girl turned around and saw a tall boy with scarlet hair and green eyes in front of her. She didn't recognize him immediately, but she couldn't believe they had met in such a place. At first, Adele simply looked at her interlocutor and tried to remember who he might be from the novel. The girl assumed that this was a friend of the prince, although he hadn't mentioned him before. At that moment, the young man began to laugh at the cook for finding such a silly job. Adele was angry because they distracted her from her abalone for such a stupid reason. Another man immediately joined the interlocutor, who advised the boy not to talk to the girl so as not to ruin her reputation. Only after this, Adele recognized in the young man the young Marquis of Granite, the fiancé of the real Adele Hyde. The man turned out to be very angry and noticed that the girl still didn't understand what was going on. It infuriated him that an exiled commoner dared to behave like that with the Marquis. The man pushed the girl so that all her books fell to the floor with a clatter. However, instead of picking them up, the Marquis began to stomp on them with his feet. Adele wanted to retort, but at that moment someone called her name and stopped her. It turned out to be the second Prince Kyle, who was walking through the imperial palace. The young man became interested in what was happening between the cook and the Marquis. He immediately stopped being angry and politely greeted the second prince. Adele slumped to the floor and explained that she had been trying to find a cookbook in the library, and that she was already heading to her room. However, what interested the prince most was to know why her books were on the hallway floor. He explained that the emperor personally ordered the preparation of the banquet, and the books were valuable materials. This behavior of the Marquis could mean that he was challenging the imperial family. The prince was not going to tolerate the humiliation towards the emperor's personal chef. He explained that the Marquis was interfering with the work of those who work in the name of His Majesty. After that, he had no choice but to bow his head and apologize. Only after this, the prince calmed down and ordered the young men to leave, and not to bother the cook. He helped the girl with the books and hoped that this situation would not happen again. However, Adele quickly forgot everything and invited Kyle to lunch with her. She said she just wanted to defend herself because the Marquis had insulted her. The prince explained that the young man openly mocked the girl in the presence of strangers. However, he admitted that it was a cruel but justifiable act. The girl was kicked out of the house, so she is a commoner, which means she must respect the young Marquis. Adele completely forgot that in the novel's world, a person's social status is very important. She promised to be more attentive to the people around her. However, the prince noted that she was now under the patronage of the emperor, and she could use his name as protection. The cook was so moved by this suggestion that she wanted to treat the prince to a meal as a thank you. After this, the real banquet preparations began, where the girl had several assistants under her command, and she explained to everyone what their task was in the kitchen and supervised the completion of the work. Adele was a boss, so she knew how to competently manage the work of people in a team. Thanks to this, they quickly managed to make enough preparations for the upcoming banquet. The girl thought that the cooks did an excellent job, even though the dishes were unfamiliar to them. So, as thanks for their help, Adele decided to share some of her secrets with them. To start, she surprised all the chefs with her special fig cut. She was in the middle of her master class when one of the palace servants distracted her. The girl was busy preparing banquet dishes, but Count Max wanted to see her immediately. Thanks to the novel, the girl remembered that this was the name of her ex-fiancé's confidant. However, now she was not afraid because Adele could use the prince's name, or the emperor's, as protection. Therefore, she asked the count to be told that she was busy preparing the banquet, and agreed to speak only with the man personally. The count was very angry because the girl ordered him to come see her himself if he had any business to do. In fact, the man was going to take revenge on his friend the Marquis. He needed to devise a plan again, so he directed his attention to the nearby ladies. Max approached them and told them that he was a little worried about the upcoming banquet. He shared that the main cook tonight would be an ordinary commoner. By doing this, he hoped to discredit the girl and show everyone how terrible she was at cooking. One of the noble ladies was sure that the emperor would never entrust such an important job to an incompetent cook. Then, the count began to press on the fact that our heroine previously had a bad reputation. However, his interlocutor noted that the young man was too rude to a girl of modest origin. The man took her words into account and continued to talk about the pranks Adele used to play. He said that the girl was a street vendor, carrying a dirty stall everywhere, and he was selling sweets for a couple of coins. Since the girl was asking for coins, it means she was a real tramp. Miss Charming didn't want to please the count's words, but in a way he was right. Subsequently, on the day of the banquet, rumors about the street cook reached people's ears. The count was proud that he managed to get all these people to talk about the girl behind her back. He even suggested that the food would be terrible and that they should throw it away immediately. Even Madame Charming and her friend were a little annoyed because they wanted to eat delicious food at the banquet. Finally, the servants began to set the table and prepared to serve the first course. Max was the first to approach the table to take a closer look at this disgusting dish. On his plate was a selection of various types of vegetables and fruits. He laughed heartily when the girl served him a very light dish of pickled cucumbers with dried figs. The people around were also unsure if it was appropriate to serve such a simple dish at a real imperial banquet. The count couldn't believe he would have to taste such a dish so as not to offend the emperor's honor. However, immediately after the first bite, he realized that it was not just a pickled cucumber. All the guests immediately realized that the dish had notes of lemon and spices. The count didn't like that the people around him were delighted with the food, so he hoped to open the forge after the next bite. So, he immediately tasted something consisting of flour and crushed soybeans. However, Max's hopes were not met, as he was delighted with this dish. The banquet guests were delighted with the unusual texture of the familiar dish. We couldn't believe that a normally pickled cucumber could taste so fresh, crispy and mild at the same time. Even the count agreed that a bite of this dish could awaken such a crazy appetite. After that, he couldn't resist and decided to try some dried figs. It had a wonderfully sweet aroma that made people look forward to the next dishes even more. Just at that moment, the servants brought out the main dish of the evening, the imperial chicken soup. The guests were astonished that the emperor himself gave his name to this dish. This only meant that it was so good that it deserved to be called imperial. Adele was very happy that the sovereign could eat her soup and never get tired of it. However, her favorite dessert at the banquet was the crispy and moist texture of the cream puff. The peach juice gave a unique sweetness and a seductive aroma, as if the fruit had just been plucked from the branch. After this, the emperor became convinced that he did not let the girl organize this banquet in vain, and he called his assistant. After this, the servant opened the specially brought box and showed the chef the emblem of the exclusive imperial chef. He announced that the chef in charge of organizing this banquet would receive a medal of honor. After this, the man addressed the audience and asked if anyone in the guests present had any objections. No one said a word, only Lady Charming paid attention to Max. She noticed that the man was very hungry, as he managed to eat everything after so many condemnations. The count felt very embarrassed by his behavior. He didn't have the courage to object. It was then accepted that there were no objections to the cook's remuneration. All the guests began to congratulate the new chef, who received the distinction. Adele accepted the emblem and thanked the emperor for granting her such a great honor. After that, the girl returned to the kitchen, where she accepted congratulations from her assistants. Everyone looked at her as a culinary master of the highest level and asked for advice. However, the idol was shattered when the former chef appeared in the kitchen. The man looked quite threatening and announced that he urgently needed to say something. Adele was sure that the man was annoyed that she was using his kitchen and stealing his space. However, she then realized that she was mistaken, as the man began to ask her about various recipes with sincere interest. He explained that he was very proud of himself when he became the emperor's chef. However, the master's irreparable appetite and the constant pain of rejection led him to doubt himself. He praised Adele and asked her to give a small master class for the other chefs. The boys supported his proposal because everyone was curious. They asked her to tell them how the girl prepared the imperial chicken soup. Adele accepted this proposal and promised that they would learn something new from each other. After that, she went to the library and took out several books that the young chefs recommended to her. The girl believed that delicious food was truly the solution to all existing problems. She was very happy to be the imperial chef. The girl was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't notice. She almost stepped on a person lying on the floor. Immediately after, she apologized to him and knelt down to help him up. It turned out to be a young man, with glasses, who admitted that he simply suffered from malnutrition. Adele assumed he was a new employee because he looked very young. The boy tried to calm her down and told her that she didn't need food. He explained that this strange black stone is the main treasure of his life, as you can eat it and be with it all day. Cooking food requires a lot of effort and subsequent cleaning after cooking, and ordinary charcoal will save humanity from food slavery and make us forget about food. The boy explained that he was going to make the pebble even smaller, and that this was only an intermediate result. He was very happy that thanks to his invention, the profession of chef disappeared. After which, the young man turned to Adele and asked if she would like to participate in his experiment. The boy immediately noticed that the girl was carrying cookbooks, so she was a chef. Adele was annoyed that he knew her profession, but still talked about her plans. After that, he introduced himself and was about to continue with his business. However, the stranger's name made her stop and pay attention to him again. Elliot Horton never appeared in the novel, but his name was mentioned several times. An unsurpassed alchemist who graduated from the Imperial Academy at 16 and at 18 received his own tower. Due to his extraordinary abilities, the model began to worry that the man might complete his development. She could not allow all the chefs in this world to disappear because of some alchemist. Therefore, the girl decided to prove to the young man that the benefits of food are not only in satiety. Elliot asked for a dish of eggs to be prepared for him, but he didn't understand the difference between the dishes. The man believed that any type of cooked egg was digested in the same way, so it made no sense. However, Adele set out to prove to him that the most important thing in food is its taste. Therefore, the girl whisked some milk, eggs, and various seasonings, and threw them into the pot with the lid closed. After a while, she carefully lifted the lid when the dish was cooked. The beaten eggs, sealed in the container, browned and rose. Even the young scientist was surprised that his favorite eggs could be prepared in such an unusual way. Adele explained that it is a steamed egg because steam retains the flavor and sells the taste. And the excellent texture, she promised that if a man tried it, he would immediately understand what she was trying to convey to him. However, after the first bite, Elliot put down the spoon and said that this could not be called food. He looked very serious, so Adele was very frightened by his reaction. However, immediately after, the inventor explained that this was not food, but real alchemy. He had no idea that such a perfect balance existed when mixing eggs, salt, and sugar. The delicate texture and taste of the hot omelet were not boring and were reminiscent of the softest pudding. The man quickly ate the whole pot and hoped that the dish would be just as tasty next time. He knew this was a real masterpiece, because such a taste could only be created through precise calculations of proportions. Elliot was impressed with the work done, so he took Adele's hand and asked her to teach him this alchemy. However, for the time being, he explained that what interests him most is learning the basics. Adele immediately realized that it was better not to tell the boy that she added everything by eye. The girl was sure that the alchemist would no longer put spokes in her wheels, since he was impressed by her food. However, at that very moment, she remembered that Elliot was the greatest genius of his time. Therefore, the girl hoped that together they could acquire modern kitchen utensils. Although she couldn't make him her student, she didn't want to lose contact with him. Therefore, she explained that she could not accept him as a student, but offered to be partners. The girl thought to herself that this reminded her a lot of playing the lottery, where you don't initially know the outcome of events. Adele pretended that she was interested in alchemy and that she would be delighted to collaborate with such a great scientist. Elliot was delighted that the girl invited him to conduct research together. The boy realized that he wasn't even participating in the research at his academy. Adele was only glad that the boy stopped developing the meal replacement product. The young man was so happy with the idea of conducting research that he immediately ran to the tower. However, he didn't watch his feet, so he tripped over a bag of flour and fell to the floor. Because of this, clouds of dust appeared due to the raised flour. Then the dust cleared a little, and Adele saw that Elliot was a really handsome man without glasses. However, the boy was very embarrassed by his appearance, so he immediately hurried to find glasses. He covered his face with his hands and asked the girl not to look at him. Adele couldn't let this happen, so she declared that the alchemist was the most handsome boy she had ever seen. The young man immediately put his glasses back on and asked the girl not to deceive him anymore. He also apologized for ruining the ingredients and showing his scared face. Adele wanted to calm the situation, so she asked the young man to do her a favor for the sake of research. However, this word immediately raised the mood of the young alchemist again. The cook said it would be fantastic to create a device that could control the intensity of the fire. The girl knew that with such a device, she could cook much spicier dishes. She could even try to cook baked chicken thighs or skewers. She was sure that no one would refuse freshly prepared seafood either. And normal Chinese food tastes much better when cooked over high heat. However, Elliot annoyed her and told her that only dragons can control fire. At first, Adele couldn't believe that real dragons existed. She was surprised because dragons were never mentioned in the novel, and this world turned out to be much more dangerous. Almost at the same time, the servant smiled ingratiatingly and approached his master. He threw a dirty handkerchief at him and said that this was the most disgusting place he had ever been. Immediately after this, Count Seaton ordered that the dade be brought to his daughter. The novel's heroine did not realize that she was a pawn of her parents and did not see her potential until the day of her death. However, our modern girl in her body was the complete opposite. The girl immediately guessed that her father called her to a crowded place for some reason. The next moment, the Count bowed his head and asked for her forgiveness. Adele understood that in the novel the heroine was weak and believed her father. She obeyed him in everything, and in such a situation, she would not have been able to defend herself. But our Adele was smart and understood that here we had to act cunningly. The girl could not act too harshly, because the people around her would again consider her a villain. So she came up with an insidious plan. She asked to be returned to the family, although she knew that a member of the Count's family could not work as the Emperor's cook. The girl was angry because her father was not going to bring her back, but wanted to use her as a cook. The man tried to justify himself by saying that she would always be his daughter, even if her name was not on the family tree. Adele knew that her father was to blame for all the troubles in the true heroine's life, so she decided to take advantage of this opportunity and the people watching around her. The girl announced loudly that she was very stupid and realized her mistakes only after being kicked out of her house. She said that she did all these terrible things and abused Lady Sabrina on her father's instructions. She remembered well how the Count stood by her side and told her what to do. The man was not going to tolerate the girl, publicly blaming her elderly father for this. However, Adele noticed that there was a poison in that wine that caused a skin inflammation that she herself could not have contracted. The girl heard that because of this, Miss Sabrina was completely isolated, and she wanted to apologize to her. Therefore, Adele suggested conducting a new investigation and finding out who was really behind this. She announced that if the Count wanted to use her for his own purposes again, she would no longer remain silent. So, the man promised that he would no longer bother the girl with his needs. However, he warned her to be careful and not talk so much. After this, the people around began to whisper even more actively, because they saw such an amusing quarrel. Adele couldn't believe that the Count had just threatened her with the death of the Emperor. No one knew how long the Emperor would be on her side and could protect her. It was no longer the sick Emperor who was on the throne, but his eldest son, the prince. Therefore, the girl was sure that one day he would catch her and kill her in revenge for his beloved Sabrina. Therefore, the girl urgently needed to increase her influence to stop fearing the threat. She remembered that the second prince had offered her help and turned to him. She explained the situation and asked for the title of knight to be conferred upon her. The girl did not go into details or say who exactly threatened her. However, she realized that she couldn't always count on the help of other people, and she wanted to follow her own path. The prince said that he could not issue such titles on his own, otherwise he would have done so long ago. The law of the empire stipulated that the title of knight was awarded according to a very strict procedure, so that it would not spread among the nobility. The title could only be awarded to those who had rendered outstanding service or made a contribution equal to that of the victorious general. Adele was upset because it would be difficult for her to earn the title and strengthen her position. She didn't know how she could avoid the problem now, because the relationships between the nobility would worsen. However, Kyle thought for a long time and said that they still had a small chance. But the young man didn't have time to say anything, because at that moment, a servant burst into his room. It must have been something very important if the man didn't even knock first. The assistant was horrified and said that a real dragon had appeared nearby. The prince immediately began to prepare for the journey to deal with the problem that had arisen. The elder prince was supposed to do this, but the heir went on an expedition, and he was not expected to return soon. Hearing this, Kyle smiled maliciously and was glad that his brother had left. Adele didn't understand what was happening, but it seemed to her like something very important. The girl didn't even realize how she agreed to follow the prince in this. Not even the servant could believe that the prince would be accompanied by a cook on this dangerous journey. After a while, the whole trio arrived at the meeting hall. At that moment, representatives from different communities were already discussing rumors about the appearance of a dragon. The prince slammed the door shut to draw attention to their appearance. He reminded everyone present that they could not start debates in the absence of His Excellency. Right after these words, the emperor appeared in the room and moved to his place. He greeted everyone and announced that they could take their seats. After this, those present sat down. Only Adele remained, standing to the side. The prince noticed this, so he called the girl to his residence and offered her a chair. Even the emperor was surprised that his chef was present at this meeting. However, the prince distracted him from this thought and asked him to describe the situation on the battlefield. The land was plagued by natural disasters, so it was time to get rid of the dragon. An ordinary soldier could not cope with a dragon, so they suggested sending a message to a mercenary army. Adele listened carefully and realized that nothing was mentioned in the novel about the 3 famous dragon slayers. One of them was over 70 years old, so they could not send him to the battlefield. The second hero was the countess, who was currently pregnant and also could not go into battle. However, the girl noticed that only 2 heroes were mentioned, while in total there were 3. Only after this did the girl realize that the third hero was the strongest swordsman in the empire, capable of killing a dragon. Of course, he turned out to be the younger hero of the novel, the second Prince Kyle. The emperor was incredibly proud of his youngest son and his incredible strength. Immediately after this, the people present began to honor the young man for being willing to protect them. However, before agreeing to this event, the prince announced that he had a request. The young man asked to be allowed to take the chef Adele with him. The nobles couldn't believe that someone on an expedition would need the strength of an ordinary cook. And ordinary, Adele herself was surprised by this proposal and mentally went crazy. After the meeting ended, Adele and Kyle returned to their rooms. All this time, the girl was silent, but the prince guessed that she really wanted to talk to him about something. Adele realized that her moment of glory had come, so she became seriously interested in it. She realized that the only knives she had were a kitchen knife, a vegetable peeler, and a Chinese knife. She added that among her combat skills, she only has 12 different types of vegetable cutting. And the girl finished by saying that she would be absolutely useless in battle. The prince was very surprised by this, because initially he did not intend to ask the girl for help. He explained that other people would kill the dragon, even though he was the only swordsman in the empire. The guy added that he just wanted to take the chef on a trip. He recalled that the girl herself wanted to receive the title for special merits. Thanks to this, she can go down in history as Adele, the dragon slayer. The prince seemed very calm and confident that they could win anyway. So he asked the girl to just sit in a safe place, and he would take care of the dragon himself. Adele was a little worried, because it was obviously very difficult to kill such a creature. However, hoping that the prince was not lying to her, this was a good opportunity to earn the title. Therefore, the girl gave up and agreed to this trip. They agreed that they would leave at dawn the next day. However, Adele did not yet know how surprising this journey would turn out to be. She did not expect such an outcome from the encounter with the formidable dragon at all. A whole day had already passed since the start of the journey, so the heroes decided to stop and set up a tent. It was very uncomfortable in the carriage, so Adele was happy when the prince helped her out onto the street. He explained that they managed to find a free spot, so they would spend the night in this place. Adele was happy to finally be able to attend to her business and prepare dinner. She explained that there was little space in the carriage, so she could not take many ingredients. Therefore, she could only take the most important things, such as a bag of white rice. And then she put various homemade seasonings in small containers. And she took some dried anchovies for broth and planned to buy the rest of the products along the way in the villages. While traveling, the girl smelled the scent of rhodonopsis root, which is used in Korean national cuisine. Adele wanted to create a mix of spicy and sour and fry them until golden brown. The girl hoped that the prince would like this dish, and if not, he would look for food himself. After this, Adele went into the forest in search of the necessary plants, and the prince followed her. After a while, the smell became stronger, so the girl realized that she had almost arrived. From the outside, it looked like a house dog stalking its prey. Adele was right, because right behind the neighboring bushes, she found the plants she needed. The girl was about to manually dig out some roots from the ground, but the prince stopped her. So, Adele had to explain to him that she needed to get her hands dirty to prepare dinner. In addition, the girl added that the chef usually suffers them while cooking. However, before she could speak, she immediately felt a strange energy surrounding her. The trees around began to tremble. Adele even thought that an earthquake had begun. She closed her eyes in fear and only opened them when everything around her calmed down. The girl looked and saw that a small groove had been dug in the middle of the forest. The prince noticed that he had only slightly used his sword technique. Adele thought that only the hands that her character had in the original were worth saving. However, the guy noticed that delicious dishes are prepared with these hands, so they are also worthy. At that moment, he took the girl's hand and looked directly into her eyes, which created a special atmosphere between them. After this, the prince began to collect roots, and Adele realized that this was the first time she had been told such nice things. After a while, the guys collected several trays with various roots and mushrooms for dinner. Adele was happy that she could prepare, in addition to fried roots, also mushroom soup. After this, the guys returned to the camp, and the girl began to prepare dinner. Adele admitted that she did not want to bother the prince with all sorts of small things and distract him. After all, she knew that Kyle would need a lot of strength to defeat a real dragon. Therefore, the prince promised to do his best and try to rest as best as possible before the important event. Adele knew that once the anchovy broth was ready, she would need to add mushrooms and a couple of ingredients. After this, the soup will be ready, and you can move on to preparing the fried roots. They need to be finely chopped, seasoned with ground pepper, a little hot paste, and finally a special sauce. After this, everything had to be placed in a well-heated pan and fried for several minutes. While the roots are frying, at that moment the soup will infuse under the lid. It takes very little time, so dinner will be ready in minutes. However, the girl did not take into account that the wonderful aroma of her food would spread throughout the wild forest. At that moment, the cook called all the other team members to dinner. After the first bite, Adele realized that she had managed to prepare a really delicious dish. The mild taste of cooked white rice perfectly complements the spicy root and toast from the plant, and the green onion and mushroom broth created a truly unique taste. Even though she prepared everything herself, dinner was simply incredibly delicious. Even Kutcher noted that he had never tasted such dishes in his life. Adele hoped that this time the prince would praise her food, but this did not happen. She understood how he tasted this magnificent mushroom soup and was still not satisfied. The cook also knew that the locals found the fried roots quite spicy, but the prince was calm. However, she felt truly discouraged when Kyle soon asked the girl to stop cooking anything for him. The young man explained that he simply doesn't feel the taste of various dishes. No matter what he ate, everything didn't seem very tasty to him, and it was like that his whole life. The cook immediately apologized for causing the prince so much trouble. She didn't understand why the boy didn't want to keep eating her food if he thought it was good. However, the prince explained that he was worried about forcing the girl to cook extra portions. But Adele took it as a challenge and promised to cook such delicious food that even the prince could appreciate it. Suddenly, Kyle's attention was drawn to some sounds coming from the direction of the forest. The young man immediately drew his sword and prepared to defend himself. However, instead of an enemy, a small red fox jumped out from behind the bushes. It immediately went to the soup pot, and Adele realized that it was attracted by the smell of the food. The prince was worried that a wild animal might attack him, but Adele was calm. She poured the rest of the soup into a small dish and carefully passed it directly to the little fox. The baby immediately tasted the food and wiggled its ears with pleasure. After that, it turned around and started calling someone who was still sitting among the bushes. Immediately after this, several little foxes ran up and joined him for lunch. Adele was delighted that even wild animals could appreciate her wonderful food. After a while, the little animals ate all the leftover soup that the heroes didn't finish. After that, they ran back to the forest, and Adele joked that they were now her debtors. Kyle admitted that it was the first time in his life he had seen such strange fox cubs. After that, the guys cleaned up and got into the carriage to move on. After a while, the coachman sharply stopped the cart, and outside the window, Adele saw destruction. The prince explained that this is a rather old dragon, as it has incredible power. The land was dry, as if after a long drought, and it was clear that all living things had long since died in the fire. Adele realized that the dragon is capable of turning any prosperous land into a real hell. In the blink of an eye, for quite some time, they had to drive through completely burned land. Suddenly, the prince announced that he would go on alone, and the rest of the people would wait. He reassured the girl and told her that if he did everything right, nothing would happen. He asked her not to worry and to wait for his return. In return, Adele asked the prince to return safe and sound as soon as possible. Immediately after this, she approached the coachman and asked him for a favor. If the prince does not return in 3 days, he must take the girl and quickly move to the capital. Adele assured herself that everything was going according to plan so far and that the prince must survive. She hoped that the boy could quickly solve the problem and return. The hero realized that even if he manages to kill the dragon, the land will not be so easy to restore. Suddenly, a strong wind blew, and Kyle had to draw his sword to protect himself. Literally, in the blink of an eye, a dragon of incredible size appeared in front of the young man. The man immediately noticed that it had a large body and blue eyes. Its entire body was covered with armor. Its wings reached incredible sizes. The dazzling silver glow and blue light created a terrifying atmosphere around the dragon. Seeing such a creature, everyone instantly fell into a stupor, so it earned its name. Immediately, the prince realized that before him was the true king of all dragons. He was very surprised that the descendant of the old hero came to kill him. Kyle immediately knelt down, put his sword aside, and apologized for attacking the king. After all, the Dragon King is the creature that carries the symbol of the imperial family. This is a symbol of power and strength found at the origins of a millennial empire. Its blood is like a river, and its body is like a mountain range. The life and prosperity of the nation depend on it. The prince understood that no matter what the dragon did, they could never kill it. If the Dragon King dies, the empire will lose power and begin to collapse, and eventually all the people will come to an end. The prince knew that he would have to break his promises, as the dragon was angry and wanted to destroy the planet. Kyle mentally apologized to Adele, whom he promised to return safe and sound. After that, he asked the dragon what he needed for the entire empire to unite to fulfill his wish. However, the king noted that he had lived too long a life and was now bored, and he wanted to die. The dragon asked the prince to kill him. In return, he promised to give him all his treasures. With these funds, he could leave the dead lands and found his own empire. The prince was familiar with this cold look, which reflected despair and the exhaustion of the soul. The Dragon King seemed to have completely forgot everything he ever valued in this life. Just like the emperor, he began to look forward to the day when his strength would be completely exhausted. However, Kyle remembered that recently his father was able to fall in love with life again, and he wanted to keep living. He realized that this was due to the food of his new cook, Adele. Therefore, the young man rose from his knees and invited the Dragon King to taste the dish of his personal chef. The prince swore on his honor that the girl would cook something that the dragon had never tasted in his life. He promised that if he tasted her food, he would immediately want to live again and the despair would disappear. After all, this girl's food intrigues even a demanding person like him. The dragon noted that during his long life, he had tasted as many possible dishes as possible, among which there were delicacies that no one had ever heard of. Then the prince described the famous imperial chicken soup with a sour broth, but with very tender meat. He explained that the meat is well cooked, so it can be easily separated from the bone. In addition, inside the chicken there is tender rice and chestnuts, and mixing it with the broth creates a unique taste. The prince described everything so colorfully that the dragon thought he was exaggerating even a little. On the contrary, Kyle thought that his description did not convey even half of the wonderful taste of the dish itself. Then he added that it was better for the dragon to taste it himself, since his cook was nearby. However, the king was interested in who decided that the girl was the best cook in the entire empire. He even suggested that the prince simply fell in love with her, which is why he exaggerates her abilities. However, the prince objected and said that his feelings had nothing to do with it. Adele was indeed the best cook in the country. The dragon admitted that the guy interested him, and that he was the only one who could kill him against his will. Therefore, he promised that he would definitely try the dish prepared by the best chef in the empire. However, if he is not impressed, then the prince will have to take responsibility and finish him off. Quite some time has passed since Kyle went to fight the dragon. 2 whole days passed before the coachman decided to tell the girl about their agreement. After a while, Adele noticed that the young prince was returning and looked relatively healthy. She immediately ran up to him and began to ask about his well-being. However, the young man fell to his knees in front of the girl and began to beg for her forgiveness. He admitted that he told the Dragon King about the girl and her culinary skills. Adele immediately assumed that the dragon would want to eat her. However, the prince calmed her down and told her that the king was behaving the same way as the emperor before. Therefore, he hoped that the chef could give him the will to live again. Kyle said that the dragon agreed to try only the dish of the best chef in the empire. Therefore, they will have to somehow prove that Adele is truly a cook. Therefore, a culinary competition for the title of the best will soon be held in the empire. Out of shame, the girl even covered her red face with her long hair. Kyle explained that if he could avoid the disaster, his situation would improve. He explained that he tried to recommend the girl, but the dragon still wanted to organize a competition. However, Adele was not worried at all. She trusted her skills, and she was even happy about the competition. In fact, the girl had many victories in various culinary competitions under her belt. Therefore, she happily thanked the prince for this opportunity he had given her. The girl approached the young man and noticed that she had to tell him something important. In fact, she just wanted to thank the young man for keeping his promise. The most important thing was that the prince returned safe and sound, albeit in a somewhat unusual manner. Immediately after these words, Kyle felt his heart beat faster and became very embarrassed. The guys were about to get into the carriage when suddenly a strong earthquake began. The prince explained that this dragon returns the land to its original appearance. In fact, literally a second after this, the burned land began to turn green again, and the first flowers immediately appeared in the grass. Adele was surprised by the rapid change in the landscape surrounding her. Just a couple of minutes ago, lifeless land stretched out. Only at that moment did the girl begin to worry that she would need a lot of strength to surprise such a powerful creature. However, the prince assured her that the cook's food was unique, as even he could feel it. He asked the girl not to doubt herself. The dragon would never be disappointed with her food. After a while, Adele returned to her room and thought about the upcoming competition. She decided that, first of all, the dish had to be tasty to be able to feed the dragon. Therefore, the girl felt a surge of strength and happily went to her kitchen to cook. Unfortunately, Elliot was right outside the door, whom she knocked over. The young man explained that he was standing outside the door because he wanted to tell the girl something. He took off his glasses, so Adele got a boost of energy upon seeing his beautiful face. The young man explained that he wanted to show her his new invention, which looked like a normal piece of paper. And ordinary. He explained that this is a product that will protect the cook from bad people. The young man told the secret of how to use it in the girl's ear. Because of this conversation, Adele had to run so as not to be late for the start of the competition. When she arrived at the designated place, a whole crowd of people had already gathered there. The girl barely managed to push through the observers to the stage. Due to the large crowd of people, she accidentally stumbled and bumped into the blonde. The young man also wore a chef's uniform, which meant he was participating in the contest. Adele was happy that there were so many handsome young men around her. Among the participants were the most popular chefs in the empire. At that moment, the only thing that calmed her down was that the second prince was on the girl's side. His words made her believe in herself more and doubt her decisions less. The host announced that in the first round, contestants would be provided with all the necessary ingredients. At that moment, their servants lowered the curtain and announced the theme of the first stage of the competition. Most of the contestants immediately grabbed their heads and worried that they wouldn't be able to cope. Even Adele realized that she had a rather difficult task ahead of her from the start of the competition. The blonde girl she had met earlier also looked very cheerful. Adele was absolutely delighted with the competition category because it suited her perfectly. After this, the host announced that the competition had begun. She opened the doors and showed the participants a huge hall equipped with chef tables. Adele was surprised by how impeccably clean and professional everything looked. The girl was happy that all the necessary ingredients were prepared for her dish. She provided me with a list of products, and after a while, I received everything I needed in the best possible way. The host added that all judges expect honest ratings from the imperial palace. The emperor has high expectations, so the girl must not disappoint him. She promised that she would meet all expectations and definitely win the contest. The servant was already used to the girl's behavior, so he just sighed calmly. However, he felt uncomfortable with the fact that the fate of the entire empire rested on the shoulders of such a fragile girl. Moreover, among her rivals were quite famous chefs. However, the man still hoped that everything would go well and without problems. Adele has cooked quite a few incredible dishes for dinner, but she has never made her own noodles before. The girl only knew in theory that it was necessary to mix starch with water and be sure to control the proportions. After that, you need to pour the mixture into a pan and simmer it so that nothing burns. Once everything is ready, it is necessary to cool and place the dough in cold water. After this, rinse well, chop very finely, and proceed with the rest of the ingredients. First, it was necessary to peel and finely chop the carrots, mushrooms, and onions. Then, carefully cut the meat and slice it thinly. The meat was smeared with a special marinade that even the demanding Adele loved. Then the girl added spices and mixed well, after which the dish could be served. There were 15 minutes left until the end of the competition, when Adele began to prepare a small snack. The girl took a chef's knife and approached the unfortunate watermelon with an angry face. After a few minutes, all the other chefs also finished their dishes and began to serve them. Following the signal, the host announced that the time had come to present their culinary masterpieces. After that, the doors opened, and the judges entered and were able to give their scores. They supposed that among the cooks, there were novices who were pursuing the creation of a wonderful aroma, and they did not take taste into account at all. One of the judges was sure that all chefs must pass a strict selection process. He heard that some were admitted on the recommendation of the imperial family, but the identities of the participants were not disclosed. This was done to ensure that all dishes were judged fairly and solely by their taste. Some dishes looked so disgusting that they were a real mockery of good products. The judges had high expectations for the competition, but all creative dishes are inedible, and the edible ones are not creative at all. At that moment, it was our heroine's turn to evaluate the main dish. At first, the judges didn't give it much importance because of its appearance, but they appreciated its taste. A little later, they noticed that the noodles were shining and attracting attention. The main judge said that the dish retained a pleasant texture even when cold, and it had the right balance of saltiness and sweetness. However, she was disappointed when it came time to taste the dessert. The girl admitted that there was no need to even taste such a dessert, so she disqualified the participant. The results were summarized a little earlier, so the chef stood waiting for the results to be announced. Adele didn't understand why everyone took this competition so seriously and worried about it. The girl heard among the crowd that a special reward would be given for the victory. She didn't understand what it was, but hoped it would be something unusual. After a while, the female judge came out and said that she was in charge of announcing the results of the first round. Immediately, she drew attention to the blue-haired girl, about whom there were many rumors. Even during the test, many judges couldn't believe that Miss Greta wanted to eliminate the participant. They wondered what kind of dessert this participant had prepared that they didn't like so much. And the remaining judges opened the dome and saw that it was several fruit cubes and berries folded in the shape of a watermelon. Watermelon pieces floating in milk looked strange, but they could add points for creativity. Everyone wondered why the cook decided to place the dish in the watermelon if everyone had plates and spoons. One of the judges decided to taste this dish, although the rest said how unhappy they were. However, the young man was very surprised by the taste of the dessert, so it attracted the attention of other people. He thought it was just milk with fruit, but the taste turned out to be unusual, like strong champagne. These words made the other judges believe in the dish and taste it. The mild taste of milk, combined with the sweetness of carbonated water, spread throughout my mouth. All the judges noted that the milk went well with the fruit, and it would have been nice if the dessert had been colder. The last judge, who had not yet tasted the dishes, was not happy with the teasing. Therefore, he quickly wanted to take this wonderful dessert into his mouth and enjoy its wonderful taste. Immediately after this, the man felt as if he were on vacation somewhere and riding on a river of watermelons. For this reason, in the first round of the competition, 30 candidates were selected. Adele prayed mentally that she could make it to the final. Miss Greta was confident that the girl would manage to pass, because she managed to surprise even her. This turned out to be true, because Adele took first place among all participants in the first round of the competition. After this, the girl was asked to stand up for the award ceremony. Adele was very embarrassed that the award was presented so formally in the presence of other people. The girl went up on stage and bowed deeply in gratitude. After that, Miss Greta approached her and wanted to ask her some questions. She was interested in everything related to the preparation method of unusual noodles. The woman was also interested in knowing how Adele came up with such an unusual dessert. The girl didn't know much about this world, but she heard about a woman with golden hands who owns the largest restaurant in the entire empire. She is very strict with recruitment, which makes her the boss of the entire culinary world, in which many try to enter. A striking example is the dessert business that Adele sold on the city streets. Therefore, the girl decided to take the opportunity and invited Miss Greta to talk later in private. Private meetings were not allowed during the competition, so they agreed to chat after the competition ended. After this, another judge drew attention and announced that she would present her with a gift. The emperor's servant took out a box that supposedly contained a special prize. Adele didn't know what would be inside, but she expected something unusual. However, to her surprise, it turned out to be a completely normal-looking knife. Great chefs had already begun to congratulate the girl on receiving such a relic, but Adele didn't understand the point. After this, all participants began to disperse to their respective companies, congratulating or consoling each other. Adele still couldn't understand what wonderful prize they had given her and what its value was. At that moment, a stranger called the girl from behind, forcing her to turn around. It turned out to be the same blonde man whom Adele had met before. The guy looked confident and was very handsome, which embarrassed our heroine. However, she got angry when he asked her how she managed to get first place. Adele thought the guy was implying that she had stolen his place. Therefore, the girl noted that her victory was fair, and the place did not belong to him alone. However, she didn't want to get angry at such a handsome guy, so she said she was a good cook. However, the guy was sure that it was impossible to defeat him. Bribing the judges was also impossible, because Miss Greta is famous for her impartiality. Therefore, the blonde said that in the second round, he would definitely prove what he was capable of. Only after that did the guy bother to introduce himself as Ferris Mario, who took second place. It turned out that he was worried that the girl had received a scratched knife. His great-grandfather had a knife and called it a flat knife, because no one used it to prepare exclusive dishes. The knife was later gifted by family decision, so Mario hoped to get it back. Immediately after this, Adele decided to hand over the award to the blonde who took second place. However, the guy did not want to accept it, because the girl won with honest work, and he didn't deserve it. After that, he got embarrassed and admitted that he simply didn't believe that anyone could defeat him and take first place, so he wanted the girl to keep the knife, and they could still compete in the next stage. After this, the young man blushed terribly and started running in the opposite direction. Adele sighed deeply and realized that all handsome men in this novel behaved very strangely. After a while, the second stage of the competition for the title of Best Chef began. The theme was the same, but only ingredients that were found were allowed, and assembled by the cooks themselves. Many were worried, but the judge said that they would understand everything as soon as they saw the competition venue. After that, the huge doors opened, and the cooks looked around in surprise. They realized that the second stage of the competition would take place outdoors. They were surrounded by rivers, forests, and numerous edible plants. The judge announced that a good cook would be able to create a wonderful dish under any conditions. Some of the participants began to worry that they would not be able to complete the task on time. Subsequently, the judge showed the workplace and announced that the second stage of the competition had begun. Immediately after this, the cooks rushed to gather ingredients for their dishes. Instead, Adele approached her workstation and carefully inspected it. Only after this did the girl go in search of ingredients and was surprised by the space surrounding her. She realized that Elliot had clearly created this place using his alchemy. The girl heard the reasoning of other cooks that they found it quite difficult to find other ingredients. They were sure that it was impossible to find real meat or poultry in this space. These words gave our heroine a great idea that she wanted to bring to life. After this, the girl went to the river and began to fish for its various inhabitants. After a while, she managed to collect a whole basket of octopus and shrimp. This activity required a lot of energy, so Adele soon returned to her workplace. There she noticed that Mario was standing not far from her and was also about to cook something. Both felt uncomfortable standing next to a man whom they considered an enemy. Adele was chopping seafood, while Mario was busy with the boiling broth. The guy was missing something, so he took the bag and went looking for food again. Adele continued her business when she saw that the guy had left the bubbling pot unattended. Before she had time to think of anything, she saw one of the cooks approach another's pot. The man silently took out the bag and poured something into the soup. Adele didn't have time to do anything because everything happened very quickly and unexpectedly. Immediately after this, she called the cook, who got scared and tried to run away. He couldn't do it because the guards caught him almost immediately. At that moment, Mario returned to his workplace and saw the spoiled broth. The guy realized that the dish could no longer be saved, so he was very upset. And depressed, Miss Greta was very angry because one cook prevented another from preparing his dish. The guy admitted that he didn't want to leave the competition alone, so he decided to drag the famous chef down with him. Miss Greta couldn't believe that the man in this kitchen allowed himself to do such a thing, so she tore off his chef's bandage and told him that in the future, the path to the kitchen would be closed for him. The judge apologized to the other participants for the incident. There was still time, so Mario thought if he should prepare something else to replace it. Adele approached the guy and offered to lend him some vegetables that she no longer needed. However, the cook refused, and the girl reminded him that they needed to be able to work together. She admitted that she didn't want anything in return, she just thought it wouldn't be fair to lose like this. Mario felt very ashamed of the girl's frank words and still accepted her proposal. Adele gave him garlic, green onions, and other vegetables that the guy needed. He was very embarrassed to have taken advantage of the girl's help, but he thanked her for it. Adele had a lot of fun watching how the young man knows how to show the sincerity of his intentions when necessary. Immediately after, she returned to cooking and began chopping the shrimp. The girl only had to add the secret ingredient, but after what happened, she was afraid to leave her dish alone. After what happened, it is unlikely that anyone will dare to spoil it again. But no one could be trusted. Therefore, Adele decided to leave a remedy that could help her if something happened. Elliot explained that with the help of this small piece of paper, the girl could track a person's location. So, Adele stuck it on the lid of the pan at the back of the handle. She did not want to resort to this, but due to the trouble she had, security needed to be improved. After that, the girl calmly went about her business, in search of the necessary ingredient. As soon as she left, one of the cooks immediately approached the pan and began to look at it all around. However, the guards were nearby and closely monitored all the participants. Meanwhile, in the palace, Prince Kyle listened to the maid's complaints. His especially important guest did not like the elephant's crest, and because of that, he simply threw it out the window. He also broke the vase, saying he didn't like the look of the rose. The prince perfectly understood that nothing could be done about the dragon's temper, so he asked to be friendly. He thought the dragon was doing this on purpose to force the prince to keep his promise. It seemed as if he was deliberately provoking Kyle to kill him. While walking through the palace, the prince overheard a conversation between several young nobles. From what he heard, he realized that the guys were betting on the winner of the culinary contest. The prince wanted to leave, but the announced amounts greatly surprised him. One of the participants in the dispute was willing to spend a large amount of money for a joke. From their conversation, it became clear that the guy was hiding something and saying nothing. The boys were surprised because their favorite in the first stage only took third place. Max pretended that there was nothing wrong with this and that this was only the first stage of the competition. However, the young men remembered that you shouldn't be so confident when such a large amount of money is at stake. However, this did not stop the young man. He still decided to make a bet. The prince immediately thought that this looked very suspicious, especially considering Max's confidence in his victory. Meanwhile, at the competition, Adele returned to her workplace. She still had some free time, so she decided to buy some fresh vegetables on the way to stock up. Adele was even surprised that the competition was so easy and trouble-free for her. However, all her joy disappeared as soon as the girl returned to her pan. She saw that someone had thrown the entire dish on the floor and spilled it. Adele was so upset that she fell to her knees and held her head. Immediately, she realized that someone had done this on purpose because the magic sticker was no longer on the handle. The girl did not understand how none of the other cooks could notice such an incident. Around this time, Mario returned to his station with new ingredients. He looked dumbfounded, and he was very surprised that someone dared to ruin someone else's dish again after the previous incident. Adele was relieved that it wasn't Mario, but there were still big problems. This time they didn't know the culprit, so they couldn't count on the judge's help. There was only one option left that could still save the whole situation. Adele announced that she would never give up and would remake the dish. The girl pretended to stay calm and went fishing for sea reptiles again. However, internally she was very worried that she would not be able to cope with this competition. She was so worried that her hands wouldn't obey her, and the girl couldn't catch a single shrimp. Suddenly, something jumped out of the bushes and fell into the water right in front of the girl. She was very surprised when she saw that it was a small fox. The animal cheerfully ran around the girl and enjoyed what was happening. Adele immediately realized that it was the same fox she had fed during the trip. However, she didn't understand how the fox, which was so far away, ended up in the imperial palace. The very next second, the animal disappeared without a trace, so Adele even assumed it was her imagination. However, the little fox immediately came out of the water and terribly scared our girl. In its teeth, it held a shrimp it had just caught in the water. The child approached the girl and carefully placed the shrimps directly into her basket. After this, the search stage for the remaining ingredients needed for the soup began. The little fox ran all over the beach and found small shrimp and octopus. Adele didn't understand how the animal got here and realized that she needed shrimp and octopus. Before she had time to finish, the little fox became very angry and began to growl towards the bushes. The girl was afraid that someone was behind her and could interfere with her again. However, it turned out to be Mario, who was also in this part of the place and came at the girl's voice. He saw that she was holding a basket full of various seafood ingredients. Adele noticed that the young man was very wet and was hiding something behind his back. However, she paid no attention to him and returned to her workplace just in time to prepare the soup. Only after she left did Mario take out his basket from behind his back and thought that his efforts were in vain. In his hands, he held a bunch of fresh shrimp that the young man had just caught. However, he decided to share his catch with the girl and brought it directly to her table. Adele noticed that Mario wasn't cooking anything with shrimp and didn't understand why he needed them. She realized that the young man was roasting a huge leg on a spit that she hadn't seen in the forest. Adele happily thanked her new friend for his help in preparing the food. However, the little fox still didn't react very well to the young man and got angry. Mutual aversion developed between the guy and the animal. However, Adele calmed them both down, saying that both had provided her with great help and support. After that, Mario returned to his workplace, and the girl began to cook. She thought she could still prepare the secret dish on time. First of all, the girl began to clean all the seafood ingredients again and chop them into the required sizes. Ideally, soy sauce should be added to it, but it is not yet available in this world. Instead, the girl decided to make the dish very spicy and thus add an unexpected element. The little fox was interested in smelling the sauce, but the smell was very strong. Adele secretly told me that this is a fish sauce with a very strong aroma. It is made from fish caught in nearby water bodies. If you create the perfect combination, the soy sauce will be replaced by an unforgettable salty aftertaste. Adele knew that people here didn't really like spicy food, but she had little time to work on the sauce. Right at that moment, the judge announced that there were 10 minutes left until the end of the competition, so the girl decided to take a chance and pour all the sauce she managed to make. Once this competition was over, the judges entered the hall to taste the dishes. Ravioli with finely chopped scallops was delicious, but it was a very common dish. And ordinary, lightly fried chicken gizzards with sauce were tasty, but they looked disgusting. Ms. Greta wanted to give everyone extra points for using only the ingredients they had on hand. After this, the girl noticed that one of the contestants had prepared a very familiar dish. Noodles and vegetables with meat came out from under the knife of the chef, who took third place last time. All the judges were suspicious of this dish because it was very similar to the previous ones. However, upon closer inspection, it turned out that this was not a repeat of Adele's dish, but simply spicy noodles with a different presentation. Although it looked similar, it was a completely different dish. Miss Greta was furious because the contestant dared to copy someone else's idea. The other judges were also sure that this dish was not prepared at all by their own efforts, so they disqualified the participant. Under the next lid, an unusual dish awaited them, which looked like a huge piece of juicy meat. Even the judges were surprised that one of the participants managed to get such a large ham. However, after the cut, everyone was surprised how the chef came up with such an interesting solution. Adele's dish was the last one left, so everyone was excited. However, when they removed the lid, all the judges were frightened by what was in the pan. One of the young men decided to smell the dish and understand what it consisted of, and the smell alone made him feel very sharp. His eyes watered, and he had difficulty breathing. The other judges were even afraid to taste this dish because of its appearance. Miss Greta commented that Adele deserved for her dishes to be tasted before being judged by appearance. After a while, all the participants gathered again in a large hall and waited for the announcement of the results. Adele couldn't find the little fox, so she asked the guards for help. However, they said they hadn't seen any animals and would definitely let us know if they found one. Right at that moment, the judges came out and began to announce the results of the competition. Miss Greta couldn't look the girl in the eyes, so she turned away. Adele immediately felt that something was wrong, because this is usually an indicator that a person is hiding something. Miss Greta announced that Mario took first place in the second stage of the competition. Adele always won competitions and was the queen of prizes. However, in this world, all achievements meant nothing, and the girl thought that for the first time she was experiencing defeat. She began to look for the reason and decided that it was because she had too little time to remake the dish. However, Mario was in the same position, but he still managed to cook the dish and take first place, so everything was fair. Adele looked at her opponent and saw that he looked very downcast. However, she didn't have time to think about anything because the judge announced that there would be 2 winners. Absolutely, all contestants were very surprised by what happened, and they began to whisper among themselves. Everyone began to be indignant, but the judges came to this decision after a long discussion. They explained that Mario's huge ham immediately caught the critics' attention. All the judges were very interested in knowing where the young man got that piece of meat from, so they decided to look inside and saw that it was actually a watermelon. At first glance, it seems that the cut resembles a juicy steak, but in reality, it is not so. In terms of originality, the guy was unmatched and the taste was chosen perfectly. Indeed, history has never seen such a dish, and it deserved to win. However, there was a second chef whose dish was very controversial and spicy. Its appearance was so terrible that many were afraid to even try it. And after the first bite, they went crazy from how spicy it was. However, the judges agreed that they had never tasted such a dish. So the girl met the conditions of the fight. The dish was too spicy, to the point that it was difficult to discern the true taste of the ingredients. However, the more you get used to the spicy taste, the better the flavor feels. And interesting notes begin to reveal themselves over time. The dish had a spicy, yet mild taste, and it knew how to surprise. Moreover, it left a unique impression that was impossible to get rid of. The judges noted that the more you eat, the more interesting the taste becomes, even if it is painful. Therefore, they could not overlook the girl and choose only one winner. Mario's dish had a great idea and great taste, but the texture of some of the ingredients disappointed us. Adele surprised with the originality and combination of ingredients, but proportions were lacking. However, both dishes were not very spoiled and remained excellent anyway. Therefore, the judges invited the rest of the participants to decide for themselves whether it was worth awarding both winners at once. Everyone agreed to this, but there was still one last competition and the final assessment of a special guest. The judges announced that in the end, only one winner would be chosen. However, this will be decided by the secret guest himself, who will taste both dishes. The venue for the competition is a specially designated room in the Imperial Palace. Adele immediately assumed that this is where the final decision would be made. The girl also assumed that the last judge and this very secret guest would be the dragon himself. The heroine entered the competition hall and saw that Mario was already there. She wondered why the young man was so happy to see the girl after what happened. The last time she thought, he considered her his main rival. However, she tempered his ardor by reminding him that there were 2 winners in the last round. The girl didn't want to fight, so she invited the young man to wish each other good luck. An encounter with a dragon could change her whole life. Adele couldn't waste her nerves like that. However, Mario didn't know all this. He was only embarrassed by how beautiful the girl was. After a while, both participants appeared before the judges, who were supposed to announce the start of the competition. Just before the start, Adele suggested that the guy should not focus on the ratings and simply give it his all to prepare a wonderful dish. It turned out that in the final stage, it would be necessary to completely repeat the dishes that the heroes prepared in the previous round. For this, they were provided with all the necessary ingredients and were not limited in time. Mario was also happy that this time, he would not have any problems associated with the lack of ingredients or time. When cooking meat, it is necessary to pay close attention to fire control so that the conditions are comfortable for it. In any case, Girl C tried not to keep the final judge waiting too long. She immediately sent for the ingredients and noticed that the emperor prawns were of much better quality than the ones she had caught herself. In the last round, she didn't even have enough time to choose the ingredients, so here the girl felt some freedom. Mario also decided to give it his all and was already preparing the watermelon steak. Judging by the judge's reaction last time, Adele thought there was a big problem with her dish. She made it too spicy, so next time it would be necessary to adjust the amount of seasoning. After a while, both chefs had finished their dishes and were ready to serve them. The guys brought them and put them in front of the judges. The maid thanked the cooks for their work and asked them to wait a little for the results. Adele was surprised how such a large dragon king could fit in the imperial palace. Before the girl had time to look back, the door suddenly opened, and a gust of wind blew over them. Mario helped Adele to stand and withstand the sudden wind. A couple of moments later, an impressive, handsome, tall, long-haired young man walked through the opening doors. Immediately after this, Mario and Adele step away so as not to create an awkward situation. The judge was annoyed that he was told he would taste the dish of a great chef. He was angry that people couldn't even choose a single winner. Adele realized that although he had a human form, he was still a dragon. The man couldn't decide whether to evaluate the dish or simply burn everything. However, he paid attention to the dish presented to him for tasting. He didn't like that there were two cooks, but the dragon still decided to taste his dish. Adele noticed that Mario noticed something strange and got scared. Therefore, the girl decided to step forward and thank the special guest for his understanding. First of all, the judge focused his attention specifically on Mario's watermelon steak. The young man invited the guest to taste his dish himself and determine what it was made of. But Adele already knew it was a watermelon, and it still seemed to her like fried meat. The judge was very surprised after the first bite and immediately wanted to try this dish again. While he was busy eating watermelon, Mario suggested that the girl run away. She was very surprised by this proposal, so she asked why Mario had come up with it. The boy explained that what was in front of them was not an ordinary person, but a great being. However, he suggested that it was a real vampire that feeds on blood. Previously, he thought it was just some kind of fairy tale, but vampires really existed. It was rumored that the imperial palace was inhabited by monsters that drank human blood. I remembered the girl's words before the final and supposed that Adele knew everything. However, the girl stood up and explained that it was not a vampire, but a real ancient dragon king. The king listened to them, but he liked the watermelon, so he decided to ignore Mario's words. The cook realized that he had offended the great being, so he got scared and apologized. After this, the dragon began to sample Adele's dish. He tasted the first spoonful, and immediately a whole cloud of fire appeared around him. In a moment, the heat became so intense that the cooks were frightened. This was the first time they saw a dragon capable of spitting fire all over its body. In fact, the king was delighted that people could cook such spicy dishes. Cheese softens the unusual spiciness of the dish, which a person normally couldn't tolerate. Sweetness, salt, and spice were in the right places, and the dish itself had an incredible texture. Immediately after this, the dragon announced that he had made his final decision on the winner. He asked Mario not to be angry, because he liked Adele's dish a little more. The young man accepted this defeat with honor and behaved with dignity. Adele was a little embarrassed that the dragon could so easily determine the winner. The next second, the girl was surrounded by the fire of the great dragon king. Mario feared for his friend, but she was not bad at all. The dragon believed that talented people should be rewarded for their skills. Therefore, Adele will now not be afraid of fire, and all the descendants of the dragon will honor her. In addition, the dragon added that the girl had already met one of them and would soon understand everything herself. After that, he used his summoning power, and a small cloud of fire appeared under the ceiling. A second later, a small fox that had been helping the girl the whole time fell from there. The little fox immediately jumped into the girl's arms and began to lick her face. The king said that the little dragon is only 900 years old, but he is quite capable. He was an intelligent child who understood everything perfectly, and usually there were no problems communicating with him. Adele immediately realized from the first encounter that this was not a common fox, and ordinary, so she was happy to know the truth. The dragon explained that he had no name because he was the only fire spirit in the family with starlight. Therefore, in addition to the main prize, Adele also had the honor of naming the little fox Mars. After returning from the competition, the prince met the girl and immediately congratulated her on her victory. However, he said that, unfortunately, the girl would not receive the title. She will now become the dragon's chef, but will still have the status of a commoner. Adele was sure that she would gain power after the competition, but everything suddenly changed. The prince explained that everything happened thanks to his father, Earl Seaton. He strongly opposed the granting of the title and spread the rumor that he was going to return the girl to the family. Adele and the prince perfectly understood that this was a lie, but the final decision was made by the emperor. He realized that if he gave the girl a title, her father could no longer accept her back into the family. Even if he could, he would not simply take that opportunity away from her. He could not take away the girl's chance to reunite with her family, so the prince had to accept his decision. The prince knew he was helpless in such a situation, so he apologized to the girl. At that moment, Adele remembered the dragon's request to convey his words to the prince. The king mentioned that the young man had won his bet and would receive a reward. Although the dragon lost, he is still happy because he tasted an incredible dish. Therefore, Adele also decided to trust the prince and noticed that he had already made enough effort to treat the girl with respect. Kyle is the only person in the palace who can stand by her side, so Adele thanked him. The young man sincerely believed that the girl deserved her prize and title, so he was worried. He wanted to gently stroke her head and calm her down, but was attacked by a fox. Adele immediately apologized for Mars' behavior to the second prince of the empire. After that, she asked the baby not to bite anyone else, otherwise they would have trouble. The prince immediately recognized that this was the same beast and the same forest they had recently encountered. The girl hoped that Mars would reflect on his behavior and apologize to the prince. However, the spirit refused to do this, made a face, and walked away. In this case, Adele decided to compensate the young man in another way. She offered to follow him and taste a wonderful dish she would prepare especially for him. Thanks to his skills, the little fox was able to give the girl the necessary amount of fire. Adele was happy to be able to cook different types of dishes that she hadn't been able to before. The girl told the prince that she was going to prepare bamboo shoots for him. She was also going to add tree mushrooms, which only look poisonous in appearance. She wondered where the prince got so much interest in her work from. After all, he used to say that he wasn't particularly interested in all these recipes. Adele hoped that it was her dishes that had such an effect on him. The prince was surprised how much the girl liked cooking. She cured the emperor and was even able to surprise the great dragon king. After a while, the dish was ready, and the buttery aroma combined perfectly with the smell of the sauce. However, before tasting the dish, Adele wanted to present it to us. The girl explained that the warm sauce harmonizes perfectly with the meat, and the taste evolves with every new piece. In fact, she cooked sweet and sour pork for the second prince. A unique combination is created by adding sweet and sour sauce to hot meat. Thanks to frying, it turns out crispy, and onions, mushrooms, and crispy bamboo shoots give it an incredible aroma. The dish turned out so tasty that even the little fox asked for more. Therefore, Adele hoped that the prince would like her dish very much this time. After a while, the girl noticed that the young man left an empty plate for the first time. He admitted that it was very tasty, but pointed out that the dish was too salty for him. He described it as a great combination of sour and sweet, and the meat was very juicy. Adele was surprised that the prince described the taste in such detail, because last time he said he didn't feel it. Then the prince explained that any taste seems normal to him if the dish is not delicious. The girl immediately guessed that the young man could become a real gourmet. She explained that people born with such sensitivity to tastes need very delicate food. Therefore, he can only eat what he really likes. In fact, the young man simply hasn't found a dish that he really likes yet. Therefore, Adele explained that the food prepared exactly according to the prince's preferences would be the most delicious. Before the girl could finish speaking, Elliot burst into the room and congratulated her on her victory. The prince was surprised that the great alchemist entered the girl's office so easily. In fact, he had very important news to tell Adele. Finally, he found out who exactly spoiled her food on the day of the second competition. The prince did not want to destroy her idol, but he had to do it. The young man stepped forward and said that he also wanted to know what was going on. Only then did Elliot notice Kyle and immediately bowed to him as a greeting. Adele noticed that there was a strange hostility and atmosphere between the young men. She thought that he had decided to keep the location of the competition a secret, so she pretended to forget that she had an appointment with the alchemist. Then the girl called Mars, who had just finished eating his ration. She told the prince that she was interested in the girl's culinary skills, so sometimes she helps him. Kyle wanted to see the research, but the alchemist replied that it was problematic. He explained that the crown prince and Kyle's older brother were behind his research. If he wants to see his research, he will first need to get the prince's permission. Immediately after these words, Kyle became very angry and considered this great insolence. Adele forgot that Elliot is on the heir's side and dragged him into this conversation in vain. The girl trembled with fear, and the little fox was upset by Adele's condition. Kyle realized this, so he apologized for his behavior and promised to find something she would like. After that, the girl said goodbye to the prince and followed Elliot to his laboratory. The young alchemist said that he wanted to demonstrate his latest invention. Adele was very impressed with the room where Elliot conducted his research. However, he actually wanted to show her another invention, which he called an assistant. The young man asked the girl to look at a small blue ball. He explained that this can be set up in advance and will record any voice, and then the sound can be played back using a special machine. The alchemist lowered the ball onto the structure of many pipes and turned on the installation. Immediately after this, a voice came from behind the cars that seemed familiar to the girl. Miss Greta said that there would only be one winner in the final. Suddenly, the news was heard that someone had specifically paid to spoil Adele's dish. However, despite this, both Mario's and Adele's dishes turned out to be winners in the end. The girl recognized Max's voice, who said that he had bet 10 million that they would lose. She assumed that the guy had bet an impressive amount on Alfred's victory. That's why he wanted to interfere with others, and especially with the contenders for victory. However, he had now lost all his money and had to pay the debt. Now, someone was blackmailing him by telling him that they would tell if Count Max didn't return the money. However, he didn't even have half of that amount, so the guy was worried. He promised that he would definitely get this money or pay in another way. He was angry that his plan was completely recorded on the machine. Thanks to the conversation, he learned that one of the guards was talking to Max. It was he who ruined the dish, but the rest of the incidents were unconfirmed. Because of this, Elliot was reluctant to forgive the guard for his dirty tricks. The young man hoped that Adele would expose the deception and use the evidence from his car. However, the girl had no intention of doing this and had no intention of telling anyone about it at all. She promised that she wouldn't tell anyone and asked Elliot to do the same. She said it was better not to reveal the secret of her invention to anyone yet. The guy admitted that he doesn't always report his inventions, he only talks about the most important ones. Therefore, he assumed that Adele did not want everyone to know who helped her. The girl admitted that he shouldn't have invented such a machine at all. She was upset that this handsome man went to such lengths to help Adele. The girl added that if people find out about the existence of the device, they can even use it to eavesdrop on others. Elliot knew that with this car and Max's plans, the girl could gain support. However, after a couple of moments, the young man made a decision and sided with the girl. He promised that this invention would remain only their joint secret. Sometime later, Adele prepared spicy pork shanks with garlic and pork shanks, with vegetables especially for the prince. She asked the young man to taste both dishes and rate them according to his preferences. Thanks to this, Adele found out that the young man doesn't really like spicy food. So she took some meat and vegetables and invited him to try them separately. The prince was very embarrassed that the young woman was going to feed him alone. He was very embarrassed, but he had already accepted food from the girl's hands. Kyle knew that thanks to Adele, he couldn't concentrate on the taste of the dish itself. After finishing the meal, the most unpleasant part was washing the dishes. Adele understood that no one else could handle this except her, so she gathered her courage. However, suddenly the door of the girls' kitchen opened and someone entered. It turned out to be Mario, who was supposed to go home, but was delayed in the imperial palace. The guy admitted that he didn't want to go back, but wanted to stay and work as an imperial chef. He explained that one of the judges recommended him as Adele's assistant. The young man hoped to stay with the girl and help her in the kitchen. Adele was literally blinded by his wonderful beauty and decided that she really needed an assistant. Meanwhile, the nobles were discussing how the Marquis's ex-girlfriend became an imperial chef. Therefore, they started joking about the guy and believing that she abandoned him. The Marquis was very angry. He even broke his wine glass on the floor. He perfectly understood that because of what happened, those around him began to mock him. The Marquis deliberately did everything to have nothing to do with this woman. He thought she would never appear before his eyes again. At first, the girl meant nothing to him. She was just a pawn in his game. However, now she not only approached the imperial palace, but also gained the support of the prince. Now he managed to get away from the conversation, but this could happen again, so he needs to get rid of her. At that moment, the Marquis heard something that could help him in his plans. There were rumors that the emperor did not have much time left to live. In addition, they talked about Max, who lost a lot of money. The Marquis decided to take advantage of these rumors and direct them in the direction he needed. At that moment, in the kitchen, Adele was preparing new dishes and at the same time telling the recipe to her assistant. Mario was very happy to be able to help the girl, and at the same time learn something new. His help turned out to be really useful, because it greatly facilitated the work of the head chef. Even the guy admitted that the girl is an excellent cook, and that he still has a lot to learn. He remembered that she once told him that with the help of accents, one could make a more interesting dish. At that moment, Mario got too close, so the little fox got angry and chased him away. Mars protected his beloved and did not allow any man to approach her. Only in the girl's arms did he turn back into a cute little fox. A little later, the inventor Elliot also entered the kitchen looking for Adele. In fact, he came quite often because he could have lunch with the girl. This time, Adele prepared balls by mixing risotto, then covering the cheese with breadcrumbs and frying them. However, she added a little more flying fish roe to her ball to give it a new flavor. After that, she carefully dipped it in boiling oil and fried it until crispy. She served the soup with baguette and mozzarella cheese. The trio together simultaneously tasted the dish that the girl had prepared for the emperor's dinner. Well-fried onions, salty meat broth, the baguette was soaked and soft. And all this gave the perfect combination with mozzarella cheese. Everyone liked the dish, but Elliot came up with an idea. Therefore, the guy immediately ran to his laboratory and promised that he would tell the details later. Mario was very surprised by this strange behavior of the guy. Even Adele agreed with him. A little later, when the girl finished her business, she went to see her friend in the laboratory. She asked him to explain what he came up with that made him run back so fast. His explanation was very complicated, so Adele didn't understand a word. She asked him to get to the point, but Elliot fell to his knees and asked her to marry him. Adele realized that the guy took her request too literally and asked him to start over. Then Elliot said that today's lunch was hard on the outside, but very soft on the inside, and unusual. So after lunch, he came up with a great idea. But first, the guy wanted to tell the girl that he had found Max. Thanks to that small piece of paper that the girl left on the pan, he was able to track his location. Elliot was lucky to be able to use a model of the capital in his laboratory. Thanks to this, the guy was able to see that Count Max was already home. The inventor knew that there were many villains who were against Adele. After these words, the girl realized that Elliot understood the structure of the imperial palace much better than she thought. She also knew a lot, because the position of imperial chef is not so easy. However, the alchemist promised that from now on he would be able to protect the girl. That's why he asked her to marry him, so that he could always be close to her. However, Adele did not take his words seriously and laughed at them. She was grateful, but believed that marriage should be contracted with a person to whom she was willing to dedicate her whole life. Then, the inventor admitted that he wanted to dedicate his life to Adele and thought everything through carefully. So once again he knelt down, took her hand, and asked her to marry him. The girl was very grateful for the offer, but still decided to refuse it. She believed that marriage was an important topic, so it was better to address other problems first. Elliot got so carried away that he forgot to show his main invention. The guy put the ball back into the tubes and made the machine play the recorded voice. Count Max could be heard going to various houses and asking for money. However, no one believed him anymore, and no one wanted to cooperate with him. Apparently, the man couldn't even pay his main debt, and the threats became more severe. The Count had completely lost the trust of those around him, so now was the perfect time to destroy him. However, Adele decided to take advantage of the situation and wait a little first. Now the girl was a cook, and for the first time personally brought food to the dragons. Everyone knows that the human form of a dragon is a guest from a distant realm. Therefore, Adele came in person to find out if the dragon had any special food preferences. After which, the girl showed her new dish that she had brought for the king. It turned out to be a sweet and sour salad with seaweed. The next thing was a refreshing grapefruit drink in a crystal glass. And the main course of this meal was spicy chicken. The dragon was impressed and hoped that the food would be as tasty as it smelled. However, he literally swallowed the entire salad he brought in one gulp. He also really liked the main dish, because the dragon loved spicy food. He asked the girl to continue cooking in the same way and bring him similar food. The dragon explained that the little fox was very calm and always took care of his siblings and younger sisters. So Adele was worried that she had done something wrong because he became aggressive. However, the dragon noticed that the girl was filling her head with all sorts of nonsense. He asked Adele to go to the kitchen and bring Marsh back. After a couple of minutes of conversation, the dragon said that the reason for this behavior is very standard. He explained that the fox cub became aggressive due to a lack of affection from its owner. He felt lonely because the girl didn't pay enough attention to him. Because of this, he was jealous of the owner, and this resulted in such aggressive behavior. Adele promised that she would definitely improve and pay more attention to the child. She had never had animals before, so she thought she was doing quite well. The girl tried to remember how her friends from her homeland treated their animals. Adele remembered what they did at home and how they took care of their pets. So she decided to use her money to buy the little fox lots of toys and various decorations. Adele hoped that through this, she could improve his life. She spent so much money that even the store manager himself wanted to meet her. Adele greatly enjoyed spending time with her pet and spending her money on him. The girl was walking through the city when a boy called out to her. She saw him for the first time, but the baby knew her name very well. He looked quite scrappy, but at the same time healthy. Adele was very friendly to the child. She stopped and talked to him. The boy admitted that he also loves to cook and wants to become a great chef. After that, the boy took out a piece of charcoal and asked his idol for an autograph. Adele happily signed the boy's hand and wished him good luck in the future. Subsequently, the boy thanked her for the best day of his life and said goodbye to the girl. This encounter greatly cheered up our Adele and made her believe in herself even more. A little later, the girl was walking and saw several palace doctors conferring among themselves. The girl listened to them talk about a strange disease that was attacking someone. She heard that there were no suitable medicines in the palace, and that even the strongest swordsman could not resist the disease. Thanks to the words about the swordsman, Adele guessed the identity of the patient. After this, the girl immediately went to the kitchen and began to prepare delicious dishes. And healthy. All ingredients had to be fresh, and the work surface perfectly clean. Mario finished chopping the tomatoes and chicken, so he asked about the next step. After this, Adele began to soak the rice, and at the same time explained what it was for. The girl mixed some ingredients by hand and tried to grind them as much as possible. After that, she asked Mario to fry the tomatoes, add a little water, and stir. After that, she put everything in the cauldron and hung it over the fire so that nothing would burn. Once the pumpkin is cooked, it will need to be thoroughly crushed. At that moment, Mario noticed that they were preparing too many dishes today. Adele tried to explain this by saying that the young man is simply very demanding about food. She was worried that he was not feeling well precisely because of her. She was worried because it was Kyle who helped her become an imperial chef. She prepared many things, but it still seemed too little to her. Mario believed that this was not the only reason for the girl's strange behavior. However, he chose not to continue on this topic and reminded us that the rice should be ready by now. After this, all that remained was to take the final step of preparing the dish. Then, all the dishes were packed and put into a large bag. Mario was surprised that the girl wanted to carry all the food personally and not ask for help. He reminded her that she managed to do this only because she had a wonderful assistant. The girl was still a little afraid of the guard, because once they had already kicked her out the door. However, this time she was not going to give up, even if she was not forgiven. This happened because His Highness, the prince, did not allow Chef Adele to enter his room. Adele did not understand why the young prince suddenly did not want to see her and forbade her from visiting. However, the guard explained that he was afraid of infecting someone, so he did not let anyone in. Because of this, Adele had to ask her old friend Elliot for help. However, she asked him to act without nonsense and not propose marriage to her again. She explained that she was a little uncomfortable with the type of help she needed. Adele asked for a protective suit to be made for her that would cover all parts of her body. The alchemist guessed that the girl was planning something dangerous again. He remembered how she once went to the dragon's lair with only spices and pans in her hands. The guy scolded the girl and told her that nothing is more important than her health and safety. Adele noticed that due to his aversion to the prince, the alchemist reminded her of Mars. That's why she didn't want to say that she wanted to visit the sick Kyle. However, she didn't have to lie because Elliot admitted that he had a suit made. He deals with dangerous things, so they always overorder them. Adele was very happy about this and thanked her friend for her help. The alchemist realized that the girl did not take him seriously and did not see him as a guy. Adele received her protective clothing and returned to Prince Kyle's chambers. The knight had seen the alchemist's protective suit several times, but still could not disobey the prince's order. Then Adele remembered that it was she who was able to cure the emperor with her food. Therefore, she hoped that this time her food would also help the prince to aim. Only after this did the guard decide to trust the girl and let her in. Adele was in this wing of the castle for the first time and felt a little uncomfortable. Everything around her seemed very abandoned and looked like a haunted house. The girl began to walk from room to room and call out the prince loudly. In the end, all that remained for her to explore was his private bedroom. The room was luxurious, but even there no one showed any signs of life inside. Adele was about to leave, when suddenly she heard a strange sound from the opposite end of the room. The girl approached and saw that the prince was curled up in pain. Adele ran to him and carefully tried to lift his head. It took her a lot of strength to help the young man stand up. After that, the cook laid the prince on the sofa and helped him rest. At some point, Kyle suddenly grabbed her hand and laid her on the sofa. The prince loomed over her and seemed not to be the same. The girl became embarrassed and started screaming loudly, trying to wake the young man up. This helped, and the prince regained consciousness, immediately moving away from the girl. Everything was floating in his eyes. He only partially understood what was happening, and explained his unusual outfit, saying it was specifically protection against any illness. The guy was a little embarrassed that the common cold presented itself as something very dangerous. Suddenly, the young man fell silent and then collapsed forward. He was unconscious on the floor, and Adele was running trying to help him. After a while, the prince came to his senses and felt a bandage on his head. Only then did he realize that everything that happened was not a dream, but it really happened. The prince apologized for the incident and said that he felt unwell due to his temperature. He admitted that he hadn't eaten anything for several days, and that's why he passed out. Adele was angry that the prince didn't drink or eat any medicine, so he couldn't recover. She admitted that she was scared because the young man had lost consciousness. As an apology, she demanded that the prince eat in her presence. The girl lifted the lid and showed the young man several types of soft food. She said she brought a little of everything, but could come back for more. In the first dish, fresh tomatoes were cooked well with sugar to create a smooth soup. And tasty. Adele carefully watched the prince's expression to assess his reaction. However, she immediately realized that he didn't really like the first dish. The next was a smooth pumpkin soup that she and Mario prepared together. The mild sweetness was achieved by mixing the pumpkin with cream and pureeing it. The next thing he tasted was a soup consisting of a small amount of chicken broth and soft meat. However, the prince liked the last dish the most. The mild taste and the slight combination of sweetness and salt created a perfect harmony. Adele immediately noticed that the young man was delighted with this dish. She was happy to finally be able to please her friend. Adele was glad that the young man ate the whole dish. Therefore, the girl promised him that she would cook any dish he wanted. The girl hoped that thanks to her food, the prince would be able to recover faster. However, she did not know at all what danger lurked for her. A little later, when she was in the alchemist's laboratory, an accident occurred there. Adele was very afraid that her friend might get hurt by her actions. Due to her carelessness, the girl touched the test tube and her friend's face was injured. However, Elliot said that she definitely did not say anything. He explained that test tubes are so fragile that they are sensitive even to air temperature and human body. After these words, Adele realized that this whole place was a time bomb. However, the alchemist reassured her by telling her that the girl was safe as long as she was with him. Adele noticed that he was back to his old ways and made a joke out of it. At that moment, the girl's attention was drawn to a crash coming from the car. The alchemist has set up an automatic notification for when Count Max leaves home. Rumors spread throughout the city that he had turned into a wet rat. Adele was surprised that her former friends spoke so badly of him. However, she remembered that the prince had said the same thing recently, but dismissed it all as a coincidence. There were people who decided to take advantage of the count's weakness and passed him a document for 50 million. Adele was shocked by such a sum and dreamed that this money would be hers. A stranger gave 50 million in exchange for the count handing over his property. He decides how he gets the money, but even his interlocutor must be treated with respect. After this, the signal was blocked because a carriage passed by. Adele assumed that the count sold his body for 50 million, so she wanted to intercept him. She was going to go to that dangerous place, because for that amount, she could buy a shop in the city center. The alchemist said that since the girl needed money so much, he agreed to give her all his savings. Adele was very moved, but decided to take a different path. She pretended to be just curious, but in reality, she wanted to steal Max's dirty money. You must be responsible for your actions, so she didn't read anything bad. The girl wanted to refuse the alchemist's help and try to manage on her own. Adele was very happy that Mars agreed to help her with everything. However, this moment brought back Mario, and the girl realized that she had another assistant. After that, they went to the market together to buy groceries, but the girl pursued her goal. She explained that for a better taste, it is useful to go to the market and personally select the products. Mario accepted his mentor's words as truth and easily believed her. The girl did not want to deceive him, but with him, she felt calmer than alone. In fact, Adele wanted to check a place that was located near the market and pointed to the count. However, there were too many alleys in the city, so she had to explore each one of them. Mario pointed out that it is better not to look into these alleys, because you never know who is waiting there. Adele pretended to look there by chance and chose to change the subject. However, she still did it the next time she would return and prepare well. The guys were returning to the palace when they saw some noise and a crowd in front of the gate. Thanks to his weapon, Mario knew that it was an ordinary commoner. However, the guy knew for sure that such a thing would never be allowed in the palace. The man noticed Adele's cook and immediately got angry and walked straight towards her. Mario tried to protect his friend and block the stranger's way. The man grabbed the imperial chef's hand and pulled hard. He said that it was a bad girl who tricked his son into running away from home. Adele didn't even understand what was happening and assumed he was talking about Mario. However, none of this trio understood what they were talking about. The man said that his son's name was Alexander, but this did not help resolve the situation at all. Then, he said that the girl had recently signed his hand. Only after this did Adele remember the boy she had recently met in the city. After this, the whole company went to a quiet place to listen to his story. The man said that the guy quarreled with his father, then packed his things and ran away, and that it was all Adele's fault. The girl absolutely did not understand what had happened and why the man was blaming her. She understood that he was worried about his son, but asked him to calm down. The man lost his temper, so he was punished with the little fox's fire star. Mars protected his lover and did not let anyone yell at her. Mario carefully examined the man and realized that he had briefly lost consciousness. The assistant found the man's ID with an address and offered to take him home. Absolutely no information from this tablet gave Adele anything new. She went to the judge and asked to send the man to the address indicated on the ID. Mars felt like a real hero because he was able to protect his lover. Mario was disappointed by the indifference with which the girl was taking this incident. However, he noticed that she can do whatever she wants because no one can stop her. Adele realized that she was going with him in a carriage to the man's house. She found it very suspicious that Mario suddenly changed his mind and decided to go with her. The guy explained that he was worried about the girl's safety. After all, the two of them, as children who understand nothing about the world, take an aggressive person home. However, the girl has completely different intentions. She was interested in the address for his ID. This was a great opportunity to explore all the alleys in search of the missing boy. And at the same time, Count Max. After a while, Adele called the man's house, and a young brunette came out to meet her. The boy admitted that he was his father, and he was worried that he might harm the girl. However, she said that she was fine and that her father was lying in the carriage. Unfortunately, he lost consciousness and suffered some burns, but is basically fine. Sometime later, the man woke up at his house and was surprised where he was. A group of friends had already told the mercenary's son what had recently happened. He reminded his father that they could strip him of his rank for such behavior. The man always advised the boy to honorably carry the title of knight, so he should have apologized himself. Adele was delighted that this young man had forced his father to admit his mistake. Then she asked why the boy does not care about his brother and treats them so well. The boy admitted that not everything was so simple and left the fox to take care of his father. He admitted that he was sure that everything was fine with his younger brother. The man invited the girl out for a while and explained that Alexander knew the alley very well. Food disappears from the house, which means he periodically runs home. If he tells his father about this, his younger brother will definitely be locked up at home, and he will be forbidden to go out. In fact, when he was a child, he wanted to become a cook, but his father was indifferent and often raised his voice. Adele was impressed with this story and promised to definitely find the little one. The girl suggested that they first explore all the alleys that were not far from the house. However, at that moment, Mario's attention was caught, who knew where the boy had fled. The guys went to Alexander's private room, which was completely filled with various pictures of Adele. Now the girl understood why the boy's father recognized her immediately. The older brother admitted that when Alexander ran away, they immediately searched the whole house, but they couldn't find him anywhere. Mario noticed that if someone was looking for him, he would specifically leave clues. He admitted that he often succeeded himself, so he can be trusted in this matter. Adele knew that Mario was the heir to a whole generation of chefs. He was born to be a great cook, which is why he has what it takes. First of all, the guys went to the attic and decided to check it there. Adele suggested that the boy was hiding there, but Mario did not agree with her. First of all, the assistant opened the window and saw dust marks on the frame. After that, he shouted loudly and asked Alexander to come downstairs. The boy decided to obey and immediately returned upstairs to the room. The boy didn't understand how they found him so quickly, but then he saw Adele. He apologized because his father went to see the girl because of his disappearance. Adele admitted that the man was simply worried, and that's why he didn't behave very carefully. After this, Alexander grabbed the girl's hands and asked her to take him home. He promised that he would work hard and become the best chef in the world. Mario pushed the boy away from the girl and told him that he shouldn't take out his emotions on her. Alexander was surprised that two famous chefs were in his house. Mario explained that if the boy had been born into his family, he would have become a chef. However, he himself initially wanted to become a knight, which is why he also hid from his family. He used to go to the roof, but this was not the solution to all his problems. Mario pointed out that you cannot run away from problems because they will not solve themselves. After this, they did not go down and decided to talk to Alexander's father. The man wanted the boy to go to the academy, where true knights are trained. This is a place where you can really learn many skills that are useful for society. The place is sponsored by nobles, so you don't have to worry about work, and even a commoner can study there. If Alexander wants to be a culinary specialist after graduating from the academy, he will be able to take responsibility for his life into his own hands. Children need to be given time to find their own path. Alexander's father agreed, and the boy began to thank his saviors. The boy was happy that he could enter the academy, but still cook. Older brother Alexander thanked the girl for her help and promised that in the future she could repay him for it. After that, Adele went home. She was sad because she never managed to explore the alley. Even before leaving, the girl noticed that Mars had run away and then returned. The little fox brought something strange and held it in its teeth. Adele picked up the strange thing and looked at it closely all around. The girl said goodbye to Mario and went to her room to rest. However, the first thing she decided to do was look at the strange little thing the little fox brought her. It was an engraved silver coin, and Adele knew what it meant. She saw this pattern in history while reading a novel on her tablet. This is the emblem of a criminal organization that appears at the beginning of the plot, with a drawing of a wolf. Now the girl knew that Count Max had gone to this organization. However, she did not understand what the drawn moon and the number 14 meant. The next day began the most normal day, in which Adele had to prepare food. The girl was going to serve the emperor ravioli with eggplant inside. Mario doubted this combination of flavors, but Adele convinced him. To begin with, she said that the young man needed to mince the pork very finely, then mix well with vegetables and add all the necessary spices. Then it was necessary to assemble the ravioli in such a way that the minced meat remained inside the eggplant. The young man was very wary of this dish. After that, Mars lit a fire, and the guys added a little batter to the boiling oil to check the temperature. After this, Adele dipped the ravioli in the batter and carefully submerged them in the oil. Then she took them out, removed the excess oil, and poured various sauces on them. Mario immediately warned that he had never liked the taste of eggplant. However, he still decided to try the dishes the chef taught him. The young man took a bite of the crispy chicken and felt the filling very soft. It was simply surprising how the girl managed to achieve this appearance. Mario admitted that Adele is a real success in the kitchen, and her decisions should be trusted. The girl kept most of the food for the emperor, and then set some aside for the alchemist. She explained to him that he works a lot and sometimes forgets to eat. That's why she helps him. Immediately after, the girl went to her friend, who explained how to decipher the inscription on the coin. The moon is a designation of the most terrible place in the capital, like the slums or the outskirts. There is absolutely no security there, so it is an ideal place for anarchy. And the number 14 means that we are talking about Lane 14 in the outskirts of the capital. Adele was very grateful to her friend, who helped her solve this riddle. She told the man not to worry, because they could soon steal 50,000. 0, 0, 0, 0. And they will also be able to get rid of Count Max once and for all, who is bothering them. However, Elliot did not understand how the girl planned to achieve this. Adele had her own idea, so the guys met the next day. They put cloaks on themselves, so that no one would recognize them by their clothes or figure. The boys arrived at Lane 14 in the outskirts of the capital and began to be examined. At some point, Elliot called the girl and asked her to stop for a moment. He showed her something strange and asked the girl to put it over her eyes. The alchemist said that if Adele puts it on, no one will recognize her. He tried to explain to her the mechanism by which the mask works, but the girl still didn't understand anything. Elliot was happy that thanks to this mask, he could observe the girl's beauty, which was not hidden under the hood. He put on exactly the same one, so now the guys could easily go anywhere without being recognized by anyone. The alchemist asked the girl to follow him and try to stay as close as possible. He couldn't believe that Adele was going to such a place alone. However, the girl was afraid that the alchemist would find out that Mars is a spirit animal and do something. After a while, the guys found suspicious boxes that were located on the outskirts. They decided to leave the money for Max to come instead of the date, based on the conversation. Adele was worried about having to face criminals. At some point, she unconsciously leaned her head on her friend's shoulder, surprising him. The girl immediately realized her mistake, but the guy already had tachycardia. He admitted that everything was fine, just that he was a little worried. The boys didn't have time to discuss this, because just at that moment, a noise was heard coming from the direction of the boxes. Soon, they saw that a man in a raincoat had come to ask for money. He walked towards the boxes, opened the lid, and put money into one of them in a bag. Then, the man closed the box and tried to run away as fast as possible before being seen. The alchemist looked at his portable device to make sure no one was near them. After that, Adele quickly jumped out and ran straight to the drawer where the bag should be. The girl took the money and looked for something to replace it with. Nearby, she saw a garbage bag and put it in a box instead of a bag with money. At that moment, she noticed that people were approaching, so Adele barely had time to hide. She escaped just in time because a second later, Count Max appeared around the corner. He was very scared and nervous, so he arrived early. After that, all the guys could do was just sit and watch. After a while, the Count opened the box and saw that there was a bag inside. However, instead of money, there was some kind of trash inside this bag. Before the Count had time to do anything, a loud sound was heard, and a bright light appeared. A couple of seconds later, security guards appeared with the intention of arresting the man. They had already caught his accomplice, so all that remained was to find a noble man who was in contact with this group of mobsters. Count Max was so desperate to get money that he didn't even ask who hired him. After this, the head of security went to the commander and asked if it was worth reporting this to the palace. This commander turned out to be the second Prince Kyle, whom Adele did not expect to see at all. The guy explained that he planned to ignore the letters, from which it was difficult to even determine the identity of the criminal. The information turned out to be very valuable. For a moment, the prince looked exactly in the direction where our heroes were hiding. However, there was no one there, so Kylo returned to his conversation with the Count. Last time, he literally managed to escape at the last moment, but now he pretends not to understand at all what the prince is talking about. The young man was not going to tolerate such disrespect, so he threatened punishment. The next day, rumors spread throughout the city that the count had been stripped of his title and sentenced to 1 year in prison. In addition to committing a crime, Max is mired in debt and abandoned by his own family. Everything was decided thanks to the intervention of the prince, who allowed the emperor to rest and regain his health. Adele wanted to enter the master's emergency room and visit him. However, the guard had not allowed the girl to enter for several days and did not give the exact reason. Adele was arguing with a security guard when Prince Kyle approached her and asked to talk. The girl admitted that she herself wanted to ask him some questions. The prince said that he personally intervened in the incident with Count Max because he was worried about the girl. Adele didn't understand how he could worry about her and not say anything about his condition. She reminded him how, recently, a young man lay unconscious on the floor. The girl noticed that if he didn't care, he wouldn't cook so much for her. Adele didn't know what the prince's feelings for her were, but she was sincerely grateful to him. Only at that moment did the girl understand what words were coming out of his mouth. She was very embarrassed, so she blushed terribly from head to toe. The prince immediately tried to calm the girl and admitted that he wanted to help with this matter only for her sake. Now he understood why her romance with the count had gone so smoothly and without problems. In fact, the prince had discovered her secret a long time ago and was helping them from the outside. Adele was very embarrassed, so she wanted to know how much the young man knew. She was even more surprised when the prince admitted that he had heard around 50,000. Zero from Penta. Adele decided not to ask how he knew, but she was curious why the guy decided to help. Absolutely everyone in the empire believed that the emperor was leading this operation. However, the prince pointed out that this was his personal decision, just as his feelings told him. The little fox was in Adele's room when he heard someone approaching the door. The baby approached its owner and waited for her to start petting and kissing him. However, the girl seemed to be in a stupor. She walked and didn't notice anything around her. In fact, Adele still couldn't comprehend what had happened recently. The girl remembered the prince's smiling face and the words he said to her. She didn't understand at all why they treated her so well. Why does Kyle, the second prince and the envied sword master, care so much about her? Because of this, the girl's heart started beating faster, and she worried about where this would lead her. Adele came to the kitchen early in the morning and checked the cleanliness of the appliances and the quality of the ingredients. When all preparations were completed, Adele announced that today they would prepare something special. Mario did the assigned work, but he didn't understand what the prince was doing in the kitchen. Lately, he had been in that room quite often, especially when Adele was around. From the outside, it looked as if he was receiving personal training from a chef because he kept asking about cooking. The girl told how you can add egg and cheese to a fried tomato sauce with bacon, onion and garlic and bake it. In her homeland, this dish was called eggs in hell because it was very spicy. Mars lay nearby and carefully watched that the prince did not cross the line and interfere with his lover. The first step was to fry the bacon until it had enough fat. Then add the rest of the ingredients, fry well, and finally add a little aromatic tomato sauce. And mix well. Mario was worried that it would be too spicy, but Adele said that the color of the tomatoes deceived him. Although it might be too spicy for the prince, she prepared a separate dinner for him. The men got ravioli with different types of fillings, which made Mario jealous. The prince appreciated the girl's care, so he happily agreed to try all the types. Adele eagerly awaited his reaction, so she watched closely. Kyle laughed and said that it was one of the most delicious things he had ever eaten. Mario watched this couple from the side and realized that something unusual was happening. After this, Adele rolled up her sleeves and said it was time to move on to the next stage. The girl took a spatula and carefully separated the tomato paste to make room for the eggs. After that, she took fresh chicken eggs and carefully broke them into the center of the resulting holes. Then I covered it with a lid and waited until the surface hardened, and the dish was ready. And Adele noticed that those eggs taste best when eaten with freshly baked bread. After this, the girl handed the finished dish to the emperor's assistant and wished him a good appetite. Before the girl had time to free herself, she noticed that Mario, Kyle, and Mars were finishing the ravioli. The men managed to eat almost everything, but they saved a small benefit for the girl herself. Mario admitted that he barely had time to stop, although it wasn't the first time he had tried this ravioli. With this, he wanted to make it clear to the prince that the girl was the first to prepare this dish for him. Adele noticed that the young prince, who usually eats little, ate a lot of ravioli. The young man admitted that he liked those with shrimp inside the most. Adele specially prepared several different types with shrimp, corn and cheese, pork, and lamb, so she served the prince all the shrimp ravioli left on his plate. The prince enjoyed a delicious meal, but he didn't want to take away her lunch portion from the girl. Moreover, he didn't want to share with Mario, with whom he felt some competition for the girl's heart. Before the guys had time to finish eating, the kitchen door opened, and the guards entered. The captain of the older brothers, Knight Order, bowed to the prince and greeted him. He didn't come alone, but accompanied by a whole retinue and knights. All the vagrants immediately approached Adele and pointed their weapons at her. The commander admitted that they had come to capture the traitor who had poisoned His Majesty the Emperor. These words greatly surprised everyone present, because Adele would never do this. Mars didn't like that they were taking his lover somewhere, but the girl stopped him. Mario also didn't believe that Adele could be blamed for anything. Even the prince tried to stop the guard commander and asked why they were taking the cook. Commander Sam did not want to enter into a conflict with the younger prince, so he was forced to answer. He said that this girl would no longer be the emperor's cook. Poison was found in the food she served at his table. These dishes were extremely strange and unusual, so they immediately thought of her. The prince explained that he observed the cooking process and that the cook could not add anything to the food. He stated that Adele was only a suspect, so he could not close his eyes until there was proof. The young Prince Kyle grabbed the girl's hand and forced the guard to let go. He looked very serious and ordered the cook to follow him to the office. So they walked, Kyle and Adele at the front and the guards right behind them. The girl immediately realized that what she had been fearing lately had happened. She only feared that the prince would be very disappointed in her after what happened. The commander did not want to leave the girl in the prince's office. "I'm sending her to prison. However, let me remind Kyle that she is only a suspect and therefore, she deserves treatment appropriate to the situation. She may soon cease to be the imperial chef, but until then, she still deserves respect." The prince ordered 2 knights to be placed at the entrance to prevent the girl from escaping. Adele asked the young man to show her the dishes in which poison was found. However, this could not be done, because if the suspect returned to the crime scene, there would be even more noise. The young man gently tucked the girl's hair behind her ear and said that he did not want to send her to prison. After that, he left Adele sitting alone in his office. The girl was more worried about the fact that someone had poisoned her dish, and the emperor might have suffered. After all, in this case, she will definitely be accused of treason and punished. Sam noticed that this was too lenient a punishment for the criminal, who should have been immediately imprisoned. The commander believed that the girl had committed attempted murder and treason. However, the prince noticed that if Sam said one more word, he would never be able to open his mouth again. This greatly frightened the young man, so he took the words seriously. After this, the prince left the guards and went to deal with this problem further. Judging by the time, the poison was found recently, but the knights immediately went to the cook. Near the emperor's room, the prince met his older brother, who was waiting for him. Hyperion was not happy that his younger brother was so late to visit his father. He said that the doctor prescribed absolute rest for the emperor, so it was better not to bother him. The crown prince added that the poisoned food was immediately disposed of. Kyle didn't understand how they could dispose of the evidence if they hadn't found the culprit yet. However, the older one was sure that the cook was guilty, who was expelled from high society for her shameful behavior. Then, Kyle suggested that the poison could have been added to the food by the one who served it to the emperor today. However, it was today that his servant and closest advisor, who had been nearby for many years, served food to the emperor. Of course, he was also under suspicion and was interrogated as well. However, the heir didn't even understand how these 2 people could be put on the same level. Kyle realized that this was a trap, because first of all it was necessary to send knights to monitor the kitchen. He deliberately got rid of the poisoned food and waited until everything was clean before running to the kitchen. Kyle had a last hope that his father hadn't at least taken all the poison. The heir assured him that the emperor felt bitterness and immediately spat out the food. Kyle was sure that Hyperion had decided to take this opportunity to get rid of Adele, who had long irritated him. It was beneficial for him to get rid of the evidence, because this was enough to accuse a simple cook without a title. However, at some point the prince suggested that something was wrong, that it wasn't poison at all. At that moment, Adele was sitting in the prince's office, waiting for someone to approach her and tell her what was happening. She trusted His Highness, but she needed to be there to protect herself. At that moment, a little fox climbed into the office and wanted to support his lover. The girl hoped that everything was fine with the emperor, because lately he got sick often. If a man took even a sip of poison, his life could be in danger. Adele remained sitting alone for quite some time before the door opened, and someone entered. It turned out to be Prince Kyle, whom the girl immediately rushed to meet. From him, she learned that the emperor was fine, and that the name of the criminal was still unknown. The prince said that they could not determine the type of poison because all the evidence and the dishes were destroyed. The girl said that there might very well be poison in her kitchen if she used it, but Mario had already managed to clean everything up. The emperor spat out the food as soon as he tasted it, so it wasn't about poisoned dishes. Kyle assumed that it was the food itself that was served to him. The circle of suspects is reduced to those who had access to this food. Sir Rudolph brought food today, but he has a lot to lose if he betrays the emperor. Therefore, out of all the suspects, the only one left was the cook Adele herself. Therefore, the prince assumed that the girl did not poison anyone, but only served spoiled food on the table. Adele immediately got angry, but the prince asked to listen to him. He reminded us that it was the height of summer, and that tomatoes and eggs spoiled very quickly. However, Adele couldn't believe that he was offering to tell her that she had served him spoiled food. The girl said that if the food had spoiled, she would have noticed it immediately. The prince understood that the cook didn't like it, but this was his only chance. The emperor also assumed that the girl had fallen into a trap and could not get out of it. That's why he decided to limit the punishment to the minimum, so as to preserve Adele's position as much as possible. Instead of prison, she is offered 1 month of house arrest. In addition, she will be deprived of all privileges equivalent to the title of lord. Adele didn't understand why, no matter how hard she tried, all she had left were miserable crumbs. She understood that this was just an attempt to protect her from greater consequences. However, she was truly furious and did not want to give up just like that. Everyone knew perfectly well that she was innocent, but they still wanted to punish her. It was better to put her in prison than to turn her into a bad cook who dared to feed the emperor spoiled food. Adele understood that she needed irrefutable evidence, the same dishes that were served to the emperor. However, she understood that the remains of her food had long been destroyed, and they would not be used. So the girl hoped that some other plan would occur to her. She needed to find perfectly preserved dishes to prove her innocence. Only then did Adele remember that she actually had evidence that the food was neither spoiled nor poisoned. She explained that she sends some food to the alchemist every day to feed him. Lately, he has been so busy researching that he completely forgets to eat. Therefore, the girl hoped that the boy had not touched the food yet, then they would have a chance. Adele said that, if you tell the alchemist that she sent him to the prince, they will let him in immediately. Until that moment, Adele had only thought about how to survive until tomorrow. But all her zeal led her only to suffering. That's why she decided not to deal with small things anymore, but to do everything possible. Adele announced that she demanded a formal trial and accepted, and it was prison. In this country, the presumption of innocence does not exist, so criminals are immediately imprisoned. The only thing the girl asked was to be sent to a specific prison. In prison, the girl was immediately greeted by a director named Sarah. Adele was happy to meet this woman and hoped they would become friends. The girl understood that she would have to see this woman for a whole month, so it was better to be her friend. Moreover, she will need to use the kitchen to prepare a delicious meal. Seeing the new prisoner's friendly attitude, Sarah hoped to become friends with Bibi. That was the name of another prisoner who had been here for a long time. She hadn't made new friends for several years, so she remained silent all the time. Sarah explained that the girl was a little shy, but she wouldn't offend anyone. Adele knew this because she had read about a girl who, at the age of 20, became the main maid of the imperial court. The empress valued her so much that, despite her simple origin, she was going to marry her to a nobleman herself. However, after the sudden death of the empress, everything changed. 7 years ago, the empress died from blood poisoning, and the girl was accused of not wanting the empress to take bitter medicine, so she gave her plain water. The girl defended herself, but this unfortunately led to nothing. On the day the empress died, it turned out that instead of medicine, the dish was filled with ordinary colored water. Because of what happened, the girl tried too hard and immediately lost consciousness. Many doubted her guilt and tried to defend and justify her. The empress refused to drink the bitter medicine, and there were witnesses who saw Bibi trying to get her drunk. Everyone said that the girl had no reason to want the empress dead. However, during the trial, the girl asked how Her Majesty the Empress was. The emperor became enraged at these words, so he applied the most severe punishment. The thing is that by then the empress had already died, and her husband was angry. Adele understood that no matter how angry the emperor was, this was too severe a punishment for such a doubtful crime. Moreover, this old prison was on the verge of bursting and threatened to collapse. Before the girl had time to think about it, a piece of the ceiling fell right in front of her and fell to the floor. If she had been a millimeter ahead, she would have died a long time ago. That's why only those who obey the emperor's orders, like Bibi, remain in this prison. All servants and assistants of the imperial palace are afraid of becoming guards in this prison. Adele approached the girl and introduced herself, trying to get her to speak. However, Sarah noticed that Vivi hadn't spoken for several years. Moreover, she ate practically nothing during the entire time she was in prison. Her diet consists only of burnt sugar. When Vivi is about to faint, Sarah gives her sugar or sprinkles it on her bread. Adele realized that it wasn't just a matter of sweetness, as the girl only eats burnt sugar. She assumed it had something to do with pleasant memories. A dessert with a lot of sweet brown caramel sauce. It was rather a dish with a crispy caramel crust, like a creme brulee. The novel said she was loyal to the empress, and no further information. Suddenly, Adele had an idea and asked to use the kitchen. Thanks to the sugar and a small amount of baking powder, the girl managed to create the desired dessert. Adele hoped to be able to create the dish that Vivi wanted to try so much. The girl touched the food for the first time in a long time and took a bite of the cookies Adele had sold on the street. However, the strange thing was that the girl just tasted the dessert and immediately returned it. Sarah even suggested that Adele's assumption was wrong. However, all her doubts dissipated as soon as they saw that Vivi started crying. It was then that she remembered her beloved lover, who often invited her to the same dessert. After a few days, Adele realized that life in prison was perfect for her. She was guaranteed 8 hours of restful sleep, and Mars visited her periodically. Moreover, the girl agreed and was allowed to enter the kitchen to do whatever she wanted. Usually, criminals were handcuffed, but Sarah trusted her and managed without them. The girl really managed to become good friends with Sarah, so she enjoyed privileges. Adele liked the director's words that if someone doesn't like something, they should find a replacement for it. Thanks to this, the girl could visit the kitchen and constantly prepare delicious food for her and others. All the prisoners immediately appreciated the girl's true culinary talent. We noticed that even Vivi started eating well since Adele arrived. She joked that the girl wasn't eating because Sarah was a terrible cook. Everyone was sure that a talented chef should not disappear in prison. Moreover, everyone wondered how the girl ended up in this place in the first place. They assumed that she had also crossed paths with someone influential. Adele also got hooked on the word and asked who Sarah was referring to. The girl assumed we were talking about Bibi, which scared her. Sarah said that as soon as they brought her in, everyone around her kept saying that she would soon be released. However, before the woman had time to finish her story, the girl walked towards them and ordered her to be quiet. This was the first time in a long time that Vivi started talking to someone. She realized that she was silent because she didn't want to talk, so there was no need to cook for her anymore. The girl asked to be left alone and not bothered with her questions anymore. She hoped they would allow her to die peacefully in this hole. Adele remembered from the novel that everyone absolutely hoped for the girl's early release. However, 7 years passed, but this did not happen. Not even the main character knew about this injustice. However, going against the emperor's decision was more expensive. In addition to this, there was a second reason why no one could do anything. The fact is that the man who framed Bibi was none other than Earl Set. Of course, the honest and principled Vivi constantly contradicted the Count. However, the Count would not dare to touch the Empress's favorite while she was under her protection. He got scared when the girl's engagement to the heir of a rival family was announced. And then misfortune occurred. Although there was no evidence, many assumed that it was the Count's tricks. However, everyone was too afraid to speak, lest they provoke his anger. No one dared to challenge the Count for Vivi and her release. So, Adele said that if a girl wants to be left alone, she will do it. However, Vivi admitted that she wanted to keep eating the dessert that the Empress once treated her to. That's why Adele promised that she would be happy to teach the girl how to cook it herself. Sarah even agreed to provide them with the prison kitchen so that the girls could practice. The woman wanted Vivi to be happy again. That's why she wanted to help her. Only after these words did the girl realize how much the people around her supported her. Vivi burst into tears of happiness and asked to be taught how to cook dessert. From that day on, the girl finally started feeling much better. Adele and Vivi were the same age and spirit, so they quickly became close. Moreover, the girl stopped constantly hiding in a corner from others. It is clear that this did not happen immediately, but there were advancements. At least she no longer refused normal conversations as she used to. Therefore, the girl's mood quickly returned to normal. And she recovered. Adele told Vivi a lot about what was happening in the world while she was in prison, about how she was expelled from her family, and she herself became the court cook. Of all the stories the girl liked to hear, she liked the one about the youngest prince the most. She was glad that His Highness Kyle was finally eating normally. A whole month passed like this, and the day came when Elliot announced that no poison was found in her food. Not only him, but other royal alchemists checked everything several times, and they came to the same conclusion. Now people are convinced that Adele really could not have mixed any poison into the food. The judge asked if it was possible that the girl prepared normal food and added poison only to the portion for the emperor. However, the alchemist said that this was too stupid and obvious, and moreover, the girl had no reason to kill the emperor. He recalled that the girl came to serve the emperor, which was the highest honor for a common person. And current, however, people were still sure that between the two suspects, Adele and Sir Rudolph, the girl was the most suspicious. Moreover, the servant repented, and the girl looked too good for someone who spent a whole month in prison. Adele did not feel guilty because she was not guilty, so there was no need to suffer. Furthermore, judging solely by the degree of repentance, Adele is the only one who went to prison voluntarily. Rudolph, due to recent events and constant accusations, became very nervous and suspicious. People began to quarrel among themselves, arguing which of the two suspects was more suspicious. They even suggested that the alchemists might deliberately spoil the evidence to acquit the girl. At some point, the judge couldn't stand it and ordered everyone to immediately be quiet and calm down. Thanks to what happened, Adele was finally convinced that the crime was organized by the count. The real heroine was an obedient daughter who always obeyed her father. None of those who accused her mentioned that the count might have framed her. Although it was too obvious to turn a blind eye, the girl pointed out that she is in this situation now only because she personally demanded an official trial. Furthermore, she provided evidence that the royal family offered her a harsh punishment without a trial. Therefore, it was the judge who became interested in why the girl convened this court. From the novel, Adele knew that in this world there is neither a prosecutor nor a lawyer. The fate of the accused person herself is decided solely by 3 ordinary judges. So, if you want to remain free, it is better to admit your guilt, because repentance is the best way out. However, this is tantamount to death for the cook, so the girl was determined not to give up until the end. Adele announced that she listened carefully to all the witnesses, and none of them could confirm that the food she gave the emperor was anything like that. This led her to believe that it was Rudolph who poisoned the food on the way. The advisor noted that Adele herself gave the food to the lord, and he took it to the emperor. However, the girl said that there is a witness who claims that the food might have been swapped on the way. All spectators in the courtroom became emotional when they heard that Vivi would testify. The count became truly furious when he realized that his crime might be revealed. The judge noted that Miss Vivi had refused to make statements since entering prison. Initially, the girl really had no intention of testifying for her own sake. After all, although it was not her fault, she was the one who served His Majesty the Empress a glass of water. Therefore, the girl believed that she had to atone for her guilt before her lover. So, Adele noticed that she also prepared normal food, but His Majesty was poisoned, so she was also to blame. The cook pointed out that this is a completely wrong understanding of how guilt should be atoned for. She realized that Bibi was only helping the real murderer of His Majesty to escape clean and out of the water with her silence. After these words, the girl stood up and retreated into a corner, sinking back into a deep depression. Adele expected the effect of her words to be the complete opposite, but she miscalculated. 3 days later, the girl came out of the corner and said that she would testify to find the culprits. She hoped that through this, their names would be cleared and their reputation restored. The judge pointed out that the girls spent time in the same prison, so they might have reached an agreement. Adele assured everyone that Vivi would never commit perjury for her. The girl announced that the witness would not testify in her case. She will tell you what happened 7 years ago, before the Empress's death. Then, everyone will understand that the one who framed Vivi probably framed Adele again. After these words, Count Seaton began to worry greatly because his involvement could be discovered. Following this announcement, the court asked the guards to call Vivi as a witness. The girl entered the courtroom and swore that she would tell the truth and nothing but the truth. After that, she said that 7 years ago she was His Majesty, the Empress's head maid. It was a great honor for her to take care of a woman when she had a fever. The judge asked to get to the point, because there would be no one in this hall who didn't know about this case. He himself was one of the judges who attended the meeting 7 years ago. Then Bibi refused to testify and was sent to prison without a trial. Therefore, now everyone was interested to know why she changed her mind and decided to speak. Bibi admitted that she realized that with her silence, she was only helping His Majesty's real murderer, and not atonement. Therefore, now, even if it is very late, she would like to correct everything. Doctors said that even if the Empress had taken those medicines, she would still have died. In the trial itself, the girl found out that His Majesty took all the prescribed medications, except for the last dose. This is written in the report, and everyone knows it except Vivi herself. If the girl had demanded a trial back then everything could have been completely different. After these words, the atmosphere in the hall changed. Even those who had just been throwing mud at the girl began to sympathize with her. Now that everyone saw how worried Bibi was, people began to approach her. Then, the girl admitted that she knew how it happened, that instead of medicines, she brought His Majesty a glass of water. Every day, she personally went to the doctor's laboratory to pick up the medicine. Then she reboiled it and only then brought it to the Empress, which took her no more than 5 minutes. She kept her eyes on it the whole time, put the medicine on a service cart, and took it away. The way from the laboratory to His Majesty's chambers is long, and the palace corridors are full of servants with carts. It often happens that several carts can be found in the corridor at the same time. Somehow it happened that someone swapped the carts. The corridor is quite narrow, so sometimes you have to wait for a larger cart to pass. Of course, you have to be careful, but unfortunately, that day the girl was very alarmed by His Majesty's condition. Therefore, she was in a hurry and did not notice the cart, which collided directly with her. At that moment, the girl fell after the collision and lost sight of the cart for a while. After that, she immediately jumped up, grabbed the nearest cart, and continued running. Vivi didn't even think about the fact that the carts might have swapped places. At that moment, Adele entered the conversation and turned to Rudolph. She wondered if the man had met someone in the corridor on the day of the poisoning. Then, the servant thought about it, and said that he did indeed collide with another cart that day in a narrow palace corridor. The judges were furious, because the man had not mentioned this before. However, Rudolph admitted that he couldn't even think that this had anything to do with poisoning. But the man remembered very well that he ran into Earl Seaton's youngest son that day. After this, everyone immediately began to think that the father was protecting his son from punishment. The count began to shout that all this was slander, while Adele watched from the sidelines. The girl turned her head and saw that Vivi was also enjoying this performance. Even the judge quickly addressed this issue and also gladly followed the events. Rudolph noted that he didn't talk about anything except bumping into his son in the corridor. After this, the count calmed down a little and admitted that his son was quite stupid. Adele hoped that her father would not dare to pay her son again. Adele's younger brother Lambert was 6 years younger than her. Unlike his daughter, who was only a tool, the count did not adore the son he had been waiting for so long. The boy received an excellent education, and many hopes were placed on him. However, he himself clearly did not shine with intelligence, and was a person of very weak will. No one had told him anything yet, but the young master immediately admitted his misconduct. The only thing this boy excelled at was fencing, but he constantly disappointed his parents in everything else. Even the count understood that his son should have immediately denied all accusations. Now Adele realized what bad luck this man had, because both his children turned out to be complete idiots. Lambert, trembling like a leaf, confessed everything during the trial. He explained in detail how he committed the crime, although it could easily have been attributed to someone else. The guy quickly admitted that he was trying to force His Majesty to eat spoiled food. Lambert admitted that he was simply jealous of his older sister. She is so useless, and his sister reached such heights by becoming the emperor's cook, that he couldn't help himself. It was a very quick hearing, so the girl was easily declared innocent. Adele didn't understand at all why her younger brother, the count, was jealous of an ordinary cook. He counted on his father and hoped that this would greatly damage the family's reputation. After her release, Vivi promised that she would submit a report for her own release. Adele was glad that at least her new friend was free. However, the next problem was that the girl had no money to get home. It was at that very moment that Adele was called by the young Prince Kyle. He congratulated the girl on her victory and offered to take her home. The man admitted that he had no doubt about the girl's innocence. He simply didn't want her to spend even a minute in prison. However, Adele convinced him that she was not doing so badly in the cell. Thanks to His Majesty's care, it was quite bearable to be in prison. At the end of the journey, the girl thanked the prince for his help, because she didn't even have money for the carriage. However, the prince assured Adele that he had taken care of everything in advance. Just then, one of the maids approached the cook and told her that the emperor would call her immediately. The girl said goodbye to the prince and ran to meet His Majesty. She sincerely believed that if the emperor had diligently protected her, things wouldn't have gotten this far. Her trial had just ended. She was tired, and he called her again directly to his office. Adele entered the emperor's room and did not expect to see other guests there. The man apologized for bothering the girl at such a late hour, but he needed her presence. He was sure that the count and his son would guess why the emperor had called them. The man immediately admitted that his only fault was not taking care of his son. The count admitted that his son was very stupid, so he asked him to forgive him. However, the emperor pointed out that Adele would decide what to do next with the boy. The count was in complete shock and feared that the girl might not make a fair decision. However, the emperor realized that out of the count's two sons, Lambert was the only one who did anything. So, he was sure that the girl would not ask for something impossible. Adele felt this was her chance to get revenge on her father and gain a position. The cook pointed out that she did not need any punishment for her relatives. The month of imprisonment passed quite well, but the young count had already suffered enough. However, the father understood that the girl could not let it go like this. There must be some kind of trap. Instead, Adele announced that she wanted compensation. The emperor was surprised that the girl wanted money, but considered it acceptable. Adele stated that this would be a symbol of apology and goodwill on the part of the count, so the amount did not matter. The father suggested that this meant that the girl herself should indicate the amount. Therefore, Adele came up with a cunning plan and said that she wrote down the minimum amount that suited her. The count should also have an idea of how much he is willing to pay as compensation. Therefore, Adele will name a specific number. If it matches his or is greater, then they will make a deal. However, if the amount is smaller, then no compensation is needed, and her brother will appear in court. The emperor noted that his cook was a very cunning girl. Adele said that she would have to name the maximum amount that, in her opinion, they deserve. It must be so large that their entire family is completely ruined. The girl would be very happy if she received her father's entire fortune. It was a choice game, taking up to the last penny or sending the young count to court. To be honest, the girl would have chosen to pay compensation for an amount exceeding the minimum limit. It was obvious that the count did not want to send his beloved son to prison. However, he has already confessed absolutely everything before numerous witnesses. Therefore, if they send him to court, the guy will not be released very soon. Therefore, the count had no choice but to pay the girl with money. Judging by the prince's words, prisons in this world are terrible. The girl was simply lucky. Moreover, she managed to become friends with her matron and had quite a good time. The count agreed that if the amount exceeded what was written on the paper, nothing would threaten his son. Adele immediately confirmed this assumption and offered to indicate the required amount. Before the girl had time to finish speaking, the count immediately announced that he was offering her 100 million penta. This amount was so large that the girl could not even imagine it. There was so much money that even the emperor himself was surprised. He did not believe that the count could think that his daughter would demand such a large sum. However, the man was sure that the girl was a real devil from hell, and she was going to take every last cent. But the emperor trusted Adele and believed that she would ask for much less. His Majesty was right, because the girl only wanted 100,000 penta as compensation. Upon hearing this, the count was horrified and realized how wrong he was in his judgment. However, after what happened in front of the emperor, the count could not take back his words. Therefore, the ruler declared that if the man did not pay this money to his daughter, he would consider it a personal challenge to the emperor. The count had no choice but to accept these conditions. After this, Zeton and his son left, and the emperor wanted to talk to his personal chef. First of all, he decided to praise the girl for how perfectly she handled this situation. He realized that Adele is not only very merciful, but also not greedy for money. In fact, the girl was counting on this from the moment she demanded compensation. It was only a show, because no matter how much he wrote there, the outcome was settled. This whole idea with the note was only for the emperor's sake, and not for the money. It was necessary to choose the amount perfectly, so that the man would not consider her greedy, but at the same time, not to sell her short. The only thing that could interfere with her plan was if her father had said that the amount was too small. However, he could not do this because his only son's life was at stake. The man realized that he had spent a lot of money, but at least his beloved son was free. Adele enjoyed taking advantage of her father's limitless love, which cost him a whopping 100 million penta. A snow-white bird soared in the sky, symbolizing purity and innocence. It flew near our heroine's house and accidentally dropped its feather there. Adele woke up, for the first time in a long time, completely asleep and rested. A new free day arrived, which meant the girl could visit her favorite kitchen. However, after a while, she arrived at the palace and was very surprised. Her favorite cutlery, which should have been there, was not on the table. In a corner of the room, there were no food bags she had left there. Everything Adele cherished had disappeared without a trace during her absence. The girl was glad that at least her beloved little fox Mars was in its place. However, she did not understand what had happened if she had been dismissed while in prison. The girl assumed that they simply made room because there were many kitchens. Adele was walking down the corridor when she suddenly smelled an incredibly attractive scent. The girl assumed it was coming from where the kitchen was now. Therefore, Adele headed in that direction and carefully approached the closed door. The cook opened the door slightly and looked inside to confirm her guesses. There she noticed a large number of cooks walking back and forth with food in their hands. They were all commanded by Mario, who had previously been her assistant. Adele suggested that all palace cooks now reported to him. From the outside, the young man looked very professional and clearly knew what he was doing. Adele was glad that her friend was promoted because he truly deserved it. However, she then got a little upset because it meant she herself had lost her assistant. Adele enjoyed working with him and had fun going out with him. However, the girl did not want to interfere with the young man's career advancement, so she decided to leave. At the last moment, Mario saw her through the open kitchen door. The young man called the girl by her name loudly and ran towards her. He grabbed the cook's hand and dragged her straight into the center of the new kitchen. There he called the attention of all the remaining employees and announced that the founding chef had returned. Adele did not understand why he was making such a fuss, because she did not know anyone in that kitchen. However, all the young chefs were delighted after hearing Mario's words. These people were incredibly happy that the girl had finally returned to the kitchen, and they were worried about her well-being. They begged the girl to help them deal with several capricious guests. The chefs hoped that Adele would return to her duties as a cook as soon as possible. The girl felt embarrassed by so much attention to her person and blushed deeply. Mario saw this and immediately chased the cooks away so as not to interfere with the girl's work. The guy apologized to his friend for not being able to attend the trial due to his busy schedule. He admitted that if he had left the food, it would have spoiled and the tools would have rusted. So Adele thanked her former assistant for taking care of everything. Mario was very surprised to hear these words from the girl. Adele was sure that she was only helping him temporarily until he himself became the royal chef. Before the guys had time to agree, the great dragon king suddenly entered the kitchen. Mario wondered what such a noble knight had forgot in this small kitchen. The dragon came to make sure that his personal chef was safely released from captivity. The little fox Mars also hadn't seen his ancestor for a long time, so he was glad to meet him. The dragon ordered the girl to immediately pack her things and go to the kitchen. Adele was very happy to finally have her own kitchen in the palace. The dragon was interested to know when the girl planned to start working after her release. He assumed that Adele would want to start working that very day. However, the cook announced that she would like to take a short 1-week vacation. Immediately after these words, the entire room was engulfed in starfire. The dragon really missed the girl's food, so he was angry that he would have to wait for her to return again. Mario explained that during Adele's absence, he cooked in the kitchen. The guy admitted that he also planned to take some rest while the girl was in prison, but the royal chefs could not please the emperor. Therefore, Mario had to return to duty and command all other cooks so that they would not die from stress. The dragon noticed that if it weren't for Vivi, he would have personally burst into the prison and would have taken the cook from there. Mario was already tired of telling the king that without Adele, he had no chance of trying anything new. But he didn't listen. The dragon was glad that the guy was no longer afraid of him, but he didn't like that he had learned to gossip. However, Mario knew that now he would have fewer reasons to gossip, because Adele had returned to the kitchen. The girl was glad that all her friends and acquaintances were waiting for her. This proved that she was in her place for a reason, and could continue to surprise everyone with her wonderful food.